Chapter 80. Hand of Magic. A level 0 spell that was drawn as a cantrip. Even a magic apprentice could easily cast it. But what about 100 hands of magic? For a moment, General Tom Seamus almost thought that all the royal mages of Stormwind City had arrived. Seamus didn't dare to expect the royal family's mage team to appear here, since they were the treasures of the king and the nobles. There was a saying in the upper echelons of the military, that unless the enemy attacked Stormwind City, they wouldn't be able to see all the royal mages. Mages were mysterious, powerful, and noble. Their food and accommodation had to be the best. Even if the whole army was eating grass, the pharaoh had to eat white bread, and they couldn't tolerate any noise when they were resting. The scarcity of mages led to mages rarely going to the battlefield. The team of mages on the battlefield today was put together by Duke Bolvar for Dragon and several nobles. When they decided to retreat, they retreated as soon as possible. Why were there mages on the battlefield? And they looked like they were on the same side. Wiping his blood-stained eyes, Seamus suddenly found that the things stuck in the orcs were very strange. They were all forged diamond-shaped awls. They were obviously larger than the arrowheads of bows, but they weren't as big as daggers. However, it was these awls that made hundreds of orcs cover their eyes and roll on the ground in pain. And twice that number of orcs were sent flying down the hill, seemingly dead. Was this also magic? The next moment, a striking black shadow floated down from the top of the hill. He was wearing a weird black robe, and his entire face was hidden in the hood, making it impossible to see his face. The hands of magic around him, which were made of arcane energy, launched arcane missiles ferociously as he descended. No, it couldn't be called arcane missiles anymore. It was a barrage, denser than a rainstorm and more violent than a rain of arrows. Those were arcane missiles that only official mages could launch. As an experienced general, Seamus could tell at a glance that it was definitely not something that a novice earth mage of the royal mages could release. Every purple-blue arcane missile was not only fast, but also powerful. Even an orc's skull would be blown off by a single arcane missile that hit the face of a beastman, whose swords might get stuck if they tried to slash at it. More terrifyingly, those arcane missiles were launched from the descending hand of magic, shooting while moving. But he did not panic at all. What kind of spell control was this? And it wasn't one hand of magic, but more than 100. Even Zimos's eyes were worth it. For a moment, he almost thought that the damn, mysterious guardian Medivh had returned to His Majesty Lang's side to fight for the entire Azeroth. He was absolutely sure that it was not Medivh. Medivh never hit his head but showed his tail, and Medivh rarely used such low-level spells. Even though Medivh rarely cast spells, Linley's impression of him was that Medivh also liked to bombard things. Then, who was he? General Seamus's curiosity almost burst his chest. At this moment, an old voice came from the black-robed mage's hood. "General Seamus, take your men and retreat. Leave this to me." On the battlefield, soldiers only accepted military orders. General Seamus almost instinctively wanted to reject him, but he shuddered. He saw his subordinates. Although their faces were still filled with determination, their eyes were filled with exhaustion and sorrow that could not be concealed. Most of their comrades were already in eternal rest here. If necessary, they were absolutely willing to accompany their fallen comrades in eternal rest. But was there a need for that? General Seamus knew very well that these were the last seeds of the Griffin Legion. If they were all killed, the Griffin Legion would forever disappear from the battlefield in Stormwind. Gritting his teeth, General Seamus roared, "Sir Mage, thank you for your help, but the last order the Griffin Legion received was to defend this place to the death." Under the black robe, Duque was stunned. He did not think that Seamus would be so stubborn. No, it should be said that he was so stubborn. How was he going to convince this guy? Duque was also anxious. He lightly tapped the left side of his chest, and a mage's badge flashed. "His Majesty Rin has orders. You have already completed the task of stopping the enemy. Now retreat immediately. After you go down the mountain, there will be backup to cover you." General Seamus's body trembled. He had been in the army for many years. How could he not tell that the black-robed man in front of him was actually faking an imperial edict? Stormwind had a strict military system. The secrets within were definitely not known to outsiders. He almost wanted to curse the black-robed old man. But the badge of the members of the royal family mage squad was definitely real. Most importantly, he saw the will to live suddenly emerging on the faces of the young men around him. How could he bear to let so many good lads die in a hopeless battle? What's the backup? Tell me. Otherwise, I can't take the risk of 10,000 troops and 20,000 civilians being chased, and accept such an order from His Majesty. Duque was anxious too. In the end, he told Seamus one of the backup plans through Mage's messenger. As soon as Seamus heard it, he immediately perked up. Warriors of Stormwind, listen up. The main force has successfully retreated. We are now retreating in an orderly manner. Seamus's loud shout undoubtedly gave the soldiers of the Griffin Legion a shot of adrenaline. Under the suppression of Duque's storm-like magic missiles, the Griffin Legion on this side of the mountain began to retreat in an orderly manner. On another mountain, Anduin, who was in the midst of a bloody battle, immediately realized that something was wrong. Damn it! How could Seamus retreat at this time? At this moment, Lothar even wanted to kill Seamus. The two mountains acted as a barrier for each other. However, once one of the mountains was lost, it would be easy for the other mountain to fall into the enemy's counterattack. Lothar had witnessed the ability of the orcs to climb mountains like they were on flat ground. In the blink of an eye, the beast men, who had been out of the archer's shooting range, had gone from shooting arrows to shooting straight arrows. In the blink of an eye, they didn't even need to use their spears anymore. They were already using their swords to fight in close combat. However, Anduin immediately discovered that the orcs on the opposite side of the mountain did not chase after them. Instead, they showed signs of dispersing. It was because the orc's green skin was very eye-catching under the sun. Before Lothar could react, he suddenly discovered that there was something wrong with the orcs in front of him. A large area of ice appeared under the feet of the orcs, and the line of battle between the orcs and the human soldiers was the boundary of the ice. The extreme slipperiness of their feet greatly weakened the orcs' ability to climb mountains. Is there a powerful mage? Chapter 81. Some things were precious only after they were lost. Take Medivh for example. With the Guardian of Azeroth, and the strongest mage in the world, King Lang could face the most powerful human kingdom, Rotterdam. No matter how many beastmen there were, it would only take a few Bayou to finish them off. Teach the orcs how to behave. Now sigh, it's all tears. At this moment, Lothar had yet to confirm that Medivh was the culprit who caused the entire kingdom to fall into a crisis. However, he was clear about one thing. If even the elite Griffin Legion was defeated like this, the ordinary garrison troops and private soldiers of the nobles would not be a match for them. At this rate, Stormwind would definitely be destroyed by the greenskin monsters. He had thought about it countless times. If he could return alive this time, he would try to persuade Lang to mobilize the 7 human kingdoms to fight against the Green Tide. But that was just a thought, until a mysterious black-robed mage floated over from the opposite mountain peak. No one would have noticed him, but the problem was that the mage's appearance was too cool. Not only did he freeze the orc's feet as he floated in the air, but he also had more than 100 mage hand that fired arcane missiles non-stop. Mobile casting was not a very advanced technique. Many official mages knew how to do it, but controlling more than 100 hands of magic to fire at the orcs while he was on the move, and almost all of the bullets hit. That was terrifying. Anduin Lothar was almost dazed. Should he say that this black-robed mage was strong? It felt like he was only using low-level spells. Should he say that he was not strong? The power of this person turning the entire situation around in a short period of time was really terrifying. Perhaps half of the mages of the Wang family would only be able to achieve such an effect. For a moment, Lothar almost thought that his old friend Medivh had turned over a new leaf and returned to the good side. The newcomer was definitely not Medivh. That strange arcane energy definitely did not belong to Medivh. Lothar, take your people and evacuate immediately. This old man has prepared a few gifts for these rough fellows. It was still the same old voice, and Noxus was stunned to hear it. Duque knew that Noxus wouldn't believe him. Noxus gritted his teeth and nodded. Let's retreat. Someone will cover us. Lothar ordered. He didn't completely believe the mysterious old man's words, but compared to Seamus, his current situation was worse. Seamus was the first to retreat. If he didn't retreat, when the orcs surrounded him, his troops would be annihilated even faster. Just as the remnants of the Griffin Legion retreated up the mountain, Noxus finally received the cover that the mysterious elder had mentioned. They were hundreds of strange arrows. Lothar's sharp eyesight clearly saw that these arrows were longer and more peculiar than the arrows of the Stormwind archers. At first, he thought that these were the arrows that the Elven Rangers loved, but upon closer inspection, he was shocked to find that these arrows were not fired from bowstrings at all. Similarly, they were not ballistae. Noxus couldn't possibly understand that this was a piece of technology that Duque had brought that could be replicated in this era. As a player who had also played Total War, Rome 2, Duke accidentally found a piece of information. He had forgotten about this piece of information, but the system genie managed to find it. That was the Roman heavy javelin. The spearhead of the heavy javelin had been specially made. First, one of the rivets on the spearhead had been replaced with wood, so that the javelin would break upon impact, making it impossible for the enemy to pull it out and throw it back. Then the great Emperor Caesar had also made improvements to this kind of javelin. He added a hard iron spearhead to the soft metal shaft, so that the javelin's penetrative power was greater. However, the spearhead was not fully quenched, so it would bend after impact and be difficult to pull out. Later, there were light javelins with lead lumps added to the wooden and iron joint. These javelins had a longer flight range. So what Noxus saw was the final version of the heavy javelin after 3 generations of improvements. On the hilltop, hundreds of young fishermen were throwing javelins after javelin with all their might. After several months of training, they were already very familiar with throwing this strange javelin. However, they had no idea that from the beginning, Duque had not trained them to hunt whales, but to make them javelin throwers. Light bows and arrows could not cause fatal damage to the strong orcs, but javelins were different. The heavy and specially made javelins drew beautiful parabolas in the air. They flew over the heads of the stunned Griffin Legion soldiers and accurately pierced into the burly bodies of the orcs. Under the acceleration of gravity, javelins became sharp weapons that spread death. More than once, orcs that had been pierced in their vital parts were sent flying and rolling down the hillside, even crashing into several orcs. Coordinated with Duque's arcane bullets, the javelin team easily suppressed the entire orc army's offensive. The javelins in the pillbox on the hilltop seemed to pour out endlessly towards the orcs. The entire hillside reverberated with the screams of the orcs, the cheers of the Griffin Legion soldiers, and the whooshing sounds of the javelins breaking through the air. Good, good, good kill. Friends on the hilltop, from today onwards, we are brothers. The Griffin Legion soldiers had seen their comrades fall one by one, but were helpless against these barbaric and crude green-skinned creatures. They had long since been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Now that they saw the orcs suffer heavy casualties, they naturally cheered. Only Noxus was clear-headed. He knew that this kind of attack could not last for long. Warriors, bring the weapons of your comrades. The future recruits of the Griffin Legion will need the inheritance of the heroic spirits of these brave warriors. Noxus had already realized that the weapons produced by Stormwind City's craftsmen would not be able to meet the needs of such an all-out war. The road to the hilltop was not easy, but it was nothing for the Griffin Legion soldiers, who had not yet exhausted themselves. On the hilltop fortress, Noxus took off his sweaty helmet. He was shocked to find that the people who had protected them with their lives were actually a group of tan fishermen. They were bare-chested and continued to throw bundles of javelins to the orcs as death gifts. The orcs closest to them were also suppressed 100 meters away. Noxus immediately thought of something and walked in front of Duque. Esteemed Sir Mage, may I ask what is your relationship with Duke Marcus? That kid is my disciple for the time being. Duque continued to speak with the voice-changing system that the system elves had helped to create. He spoke in a tone that seemed to be taking advantage of his seniority and age. Noxus was very smart, and he immediately thought of many things. So the experienced Duque actually had such a mysterious and powerful teacher supporting him. No wonder. Chapter 82. If that was the case, many things could be explained. Noxus didn't know that someone had prepared so many backups without him knowing. He shuddered at the thought of the old man in front of him being an enemy. I know that the situation is urgent, but I still need a reason. Why did you help us? Noxus stared at Duke, who was disguised as an old man. Duque stretched out his hands, revealing 2 old hands that had been specially made up. He gently pulled back his hood, revealing a white beard. Just because I'm a human? Is that a good enough reason? Nox's body trembled. Right. What a simple reason. In the face of a strange foreign invasion, it was natural for humans to band together to defend against the enemy. Noxus changed his tone. We have many injured soldiers. We will not abandon our comrades. Lads, the second stage. Duque clapped his hands, and a group of peasants rushed out from the back of the mountain. Noxus was no fool. He could tell at a glance that many of the peasants were lumberjacks from the nearby East Cove lumberjacks. They pulled a large number of long ox carts that were originally used to carry logs, eagerly helping the uninjured Griffin Legion soldiers move them onto the ox carts. Noxus was dumbfounded. The other party had prepared so well. Based on the mysterious Magus performance just now, Noxus was sure that he had met a benefactor. Noxus waved to the soldiers. Let's retreat first. Some of the soldiers objected. No, how can we leave civilians behind? Duque laughed. Haha, you're wearing heavy armor. How can you run faster than these unarmed javelin throwers? Besides, I'm the one who stays behind. Do you have any objections now? The moment Duque words left his mouth, the surrounding soldiers were filled with respect. Even the lightly injured soldiers stood up in unison, placing their hands on their chests and raising their swords to the sky. Sword salute. A soldier's most solemn salute to someone worthy of respect. Including Noxus, a total of 300 soldiers saluted to Duque. Duque waved his hand. You can go first. Don't stop me from killing orcs. I'll catch up to you in a bit and let you watch the second act. While Duque was speaking, an uninjured javelin thrower, who was hiding in the firing hole of the fortress, suddenly howled miserably. Duque narrowed his eyes and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Pain curse. Lothar's expression was also terrible. Your Excellency, I. With a wave of his hand, the curse was dispelled by Duque. Go away, this is a battle between mages. The War of the Mages, what a mysterious term. However, this word clearly told Lothar that this wasn't something a warrior like him could meddle in. Nodding heavily, Lothar led his men and Duque's javelin throwers down the mountain. The entire mountaintop fortress became empty once again. In front of the tightly shut gate of the fortress, Duque stood alone against the wind. Standing on a high place, the feeling of the cool spring breeze, gently brushing against his face, was actually quite nice. Unfortunately, the thick smell of blood was not enough to make one feel comfortable. Duque couldn't help but narrow his eyes as he stared down at the winding mountain below. Almost every step of the mountain was filled with corpses. Some were orcs, but most were humans. Thousands of ferocious orcs stared at Duque. They let out low growls, their pointed fangs reflecting a strange light under the sunlight. If it wasn't for the fact that orcs didn't have the habit of eating humans, Duque might have been worried that he would be torn apart and eaten if he accidentally died. Now Duque had to buy time for the Griffin Legion to retreat. The orcs wanted to swarm up, but Duque had more than 100 hands of magic floating in the air, which made the orcs who had just been taught a lesson a little afraid to approach. Useless. Is a mere spellcaster enough to scare you? A hunchbacked orc wearing a black robe appeared. Everywhere he went, the orcs immediately parted like the tide. This was a fellow of high status. To receive such treatment among the orcs, if he wasn't the chief of a large clan, then there was only one other possibility: the infamous warlock of the Shadow Council. This was the first time that Duque had seen these warlocks appear on the Azeroth continent from such a close distance. This reminded him of the tragic experience of being abused by warlocks as a mage in the game. The warlock brought the hellhounds to teach mages how to be human. But you didn't even bring a pet? Are you looking down on me? No, maybe you brought a succubus? Even though he had been a transmigrator for a long time, when Duque suddenly encountered a warlock, he couldn't help but think like a player. It was a pity that this person didn't look like Gul'dan. If that was the case, there was still a fight. The World Guardian Medivh and the Beastman Warlock Gul'dan were both demigod-level existences in most games. Duque didn't have the confidence to face one of them when he was so weak. Warlocks were experts who used demonic power to play with souls. Duque really didn't dare to be sure that if he died at the hands of a warlock, he wouldn't become a ghoul when he revived. The warlock shouted in a gibberish. Duque couldn't understand the orc language, and the system elf didn't know how to translate it. Just seeing the system elf's random translation of, "The Imperial Army wants you to surrender and not kill," made Duque want to strangle the system elf to death. It was useless to say anything, and Duque wasn't interested in a human running over to the orcs. So there was only one thing he could do. Duque raised his middle finger. Yes, this was the starting gesture for Duque to release Blizzard. If this was a game, a mage would be an idiot to release Blizzard on a warlock. But reality was obviously different. Within the range of Blizzard, the icicles fell rapidly, very well interfering with the warlock's vision. The warlock retaliated with a shadow arrow, but with the system elf's ballistic judgment assistance, Duque only moved sideways a step to the right, allowing the shadow arrow to hit the huge fortress gate. Without hesitation, 108 hands of magic suddenly grabbed weapons from all over the fortress. "Sorry, I'm not some ordinary mage. If you don't have any other tricks up your sleeve, then die." 108 javelins were thrown brazenly, from the sky to the ground, almost blocking all the orc warlocks' escape routes. Almost at the same time, Duque was hit. Countless frightening illusions suddenly appeared in his mind. They were fragments of fear hidden in his heart, fragments that he had completely forgotten. Duque suddenly saw, in the dead of night, a huge venomous snake flew up, opened its mouth full of fangs, and bit his face. That fear, that pain was so real that Duque almost instantly let out a scream. Chapter 83. Fear poured into his thoughts like a tide, or it could be said that a malicious robber had kicked open the door to Duque's heart and barged in wantonly. Duque's breathing quickened, and his pupils dilated. However, he turned a deaf ear to the urgent warning of the system elf. Many desperate and heart-palpitating scenes emerged in Duque's mind, such as those terrible pale skeleton soldiers in horror movies, waving rusty machetes and slashing at him. Another example was walking by a small river, and suddenly being pulled into the river by a huge black octopus tentacle. He struggled desperately in the cold water, but to no avail. Duque struggled to get rid of these terrible illusions, but this illusion of fear that came from the depths of his memory had completely dominated Duque's 5 senses. Whether it was vision, hearing, smell, taste, or touch, they were all real feelings. This feeling of terror easily disrupted Duque's thoughts. He felt his energy drying up, and there was a piercing pain in his brain. He didn't know when, but from his forehead to his neck, and then to his back, his whole body was drenched, as if he had been fished out of the water. Seeing Duque's clumsy dance, the orcs who had just been defeated burst into laughter. The orcs who advocated force worshipped heroic warriors the most. They instinctively hated spellcasters, but they had enough respect for the shaman priests in the tribe, and even these new warlocks. They had thought that this would be another gorgeous killing feast for the warlocks. They had thought that the mage controlled by fear would laughably run under the orc's axe and take a blow with his thin body. However, the situation suddenly changed. Those hands of magic that should have disappeared were still attacking fiercely, throwing a large number of javelins. Unfortunately, the seemingly invincible javelin tactic failed. This orc warlock actually took out an axe and blocked all the threatening javelins with clanging sounds. If Duque was still sober, he would have realized that before becoming a warlock of the Shadow Council, almost all orc warlocks used to be shamans. Shamans who could fight and cast spells. Compared to the simple orc warriors, the shaman was more versatile in the tribe. Duque's strange reaction also made Barca the warlock feel puzzled. He really couldn't understand how Duque, who had already fallen into chaos under his fear spell, could control those hands of magic. Obviously, these hands of magic were still operating independently. Countless purple-blue rays of light suddenly shot out from the hand of magic, and the violent arcane missiles hit the orc warlock, who was in the middle of casting a spell. But what even the system elf didn't predict was that the spell shot by the hand of magic actually bounced off the beastman warlock's black robe and disappeared. Magic was a part of mysticism, but it was also a part of energetics. Just like how high-level mystery could suppress low-level mystery, low-level arcane missiles with lower energy density were rejected by the evil dark energy around the warlock. Host, wake up. I can't take it anymore. The system elf croaked in Duque's spiritual world. Weak human, I don't know how you managed to fight back under the fear spell, but it's all over. Die. The orc warlock roared in the orc language and cast a sacrifice spell at the orc warlock. Along with the raging flames of destruction, the evil demonic power spread in all directions. That power not only infected the beastmen who had already absorbed the demonic blood, but it also made them even more berserk and bloodthirsty. At the same time, it also affected Duque. Suddenly, Duque felt that he was being looked down upon. He was being looked down upon by someone who he only saw as an EXP monster. His mental state was so strange that he didn't even notice the system notification. Stimulated by unknown demonic energy, you have triggered the negative soul status, pride of the 7 sins. Your words and actions will be out of control. You and the enemies affected by your pride will not use any defensive means. Among all the means of attack, you will automatically choose the most powerful one. If either side kills the other, it will cause a double blow to the enemy's morale. You are immune to the reduction of morale. You will automatically be affected by the effect of reckless curse. You will not run away and are immune to fear. Hadash, Duque's body suddenly trembled. The orc warlock was shocked to find that the flames of destruction that were burning Duque's body were all gathered in Duque's hands. Duque suddenly lifted his hood. What appeared in the orc's eyes was a white-haired, white-bearded old man with an arrogant expression. The corners of his mouth were raised high. Duque spoke in a strange language that was neither the common human language nor the orc language. Both sides could understand it. This should be some kind of spiritual communication that went beyond body language. Listen up. Green-skinned bastards, my name is Huijia, hundred-handed death god Huijia. The world of Azeroth is my playground. There is no place for ugly monsters like you to join in. Let me tell you, I even killed Gul'dan's boss Kill Jaden countless times. Gul'dan is nothing. If you know what's good for you, then scram back to where you came from. Otherwise I, Huijia, will show you what regret and despair are. The beastmen were dumbfounded by his words. They didn't know who Kill Jaden was, but almost every orc knew how powerful Gul'dan was. This skinny human actually said Gul'dan is nothing? After a short moment of shock, the orcs all roared in anger. But Duque's arrogance did not decrease. He raised his chin high and looked at the millions of orcs like they were trash. Gul'dan's power came from the devil. More accurately, it came from Kill Jaden. This was a top secret. Not many warlocks in Gul'dan's Shadow Council knew about it. But this warlock in front of him was one of them. He stretched out his strong arm and grabbed a chief next to him. Leave this arrogant guy to me. Tell your people not to make a move. Right now the chief of the tribe was the mastermind. But any chief with a brain knew that the real power was in the hands of Gul'dan and his Shadow Council. The chieftain nodded and barked a few words at his men. Instantly, the entire place was silent. Weak humans. Let me balsa. Show you how terrifying the power of destruction is. Duque raised a hand and beckoned with his index finger. Come. Chapter 84. Provocation. Absolute provocation. Gul'dan's status in the tribe was second only to one, and above tens of thousands of people. The Shadow Council was an organization that controlled the power of the tribe. Every warlock had a sense of superiority. Plus, pride had an effect on Balsa and Duque. It was hilarious. Both parties, who had countless tricks up their sleeves, were actually using magic against each other. Using magic against each other was not uncommon in the battles of the Pharaoh. Completely abandoning defense for an attack was something that had never been seen before. It should have been a hilarious scene, but because both parties poured all of their magic into this attack, it suddenly became extremely thrilling. The tip of Balsa's magic staff was also a skull. If one looked closely, they would realize that it was made from the skull of a high-ranking Drenii priest. The evil Balsa forced this Drenii priest, who once believed in the holy light, to witness the murder of thousands of Drenii children. He was tortured inhumanely, and then soaked in a pool of blood to drown him. Finally, his resentful soul was imprisoned in his skull. The wavy evil resentment that this skull staff emitted could be seen with the naked eye. The dark light on the magic staff became brighter and brighter. 3 faint black halos with mysterious runes appeared on the body of the staff. From the top to the bottom, the front, the middle, and the back of the staff formed a cone shape. The largest halo instantly expanded to a radius of about a meter. The 2 halos at the front and the back were rotating clockwise, while the one in the middle was rotating counterclockwise. It was like a strange drill. Gulp. Accompanied by an unknown incantation, an ink-black pillar of light suddenly appeared. It pierced through the curtain of air in front of him, swept away the golden light of the sun, and pierced straight towards Duque, who was in front of the gate of the fortress. The light was so dark that it seemed like it could destroy the entire day, and forcefully pull the world into the realm of night. This light also shocked every pair of eyes on the battlefield, and countless orcs subconsciously lowered their gazes. They did not dare to look at it. However, in the next moment, the orcs raised their heads again. They felt a gust of blazing wind blowing towards them, and a scorching hot breath brushed past their cheeks. They could not believe their eyes. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. Sun. There were actually 2 suns in the world. No, it wasn't a sun in front of him. It was a huge fireball that looked like a sun, with a radius of more than 50 meters. It was enough to burn an entire mountain, let alone a single beast man. In the depths of the orc warlock's red eyes, his pupils shrank to a point. He slightly opened his jaws full of fangs and breathed heavily. The orcs next to him thought he was nervous. Only he, who had personally experienced the battle between the orcs and the Drenii, knew that he had been fooled. This mysterious powerful wizard in front of him was just a fake. What high-ranking pharaoh? What human powerhouse? Bullshit. Who was it trying to fool with such a motley and low concentration of magic power? It would be difficult for a true mage to produce so many impurities in their own magic power. Regardless of whether he was an old man or not, his magic level was definitely not high. Barsa was enraged. He was truly enraged. He stabbed with his magic staff, and shot out all the magic power he had infused into the staff. Go to hell. You. Originally, Barsa wanted to shout out the word liar, but he was stunned again. He didn't even realize that the magic staff that he was holding tightly had loosened its grip on his rough and powerful knuckles. The speed at which his opponent gathered magic power was too fast. It was not something that a low-ranking wizard could do. Both of them had infused all their magic power, but Barsa's casting time was a full 3 seconds. How could his opponent cast it instantaneously? Barsa also knew that high-ranking warlocks could greatly reduce the casting time by training their own casting techniques. However, wasn't his opponent's technique too terrifying? The huge fireball came crashing down. The airflow and dust stirred up by the fireball caused all the orcs' whips and hair to fly in the opposite direction. The orcs seemed to be scared out of their wits. This group of rough men, who only knew how to fight hand-to-hand, were instinctively afraid of this seemingly powerful super fireball. Only Balsa's eyes were filled with disdain. He wanted to say, "Watch my shadow arrow blow up that guy's fireball, and turn him into ashes in the shadow." However, the situation changed once again. The huge fireball arrived before the shadow arrow could travel more than 10 meters. There wasn't the earth-shattering collision that Barsa had expected. Instead, the huge fireball split into 108. It changed from a brute force flame blast to a skillful, rapid fireball. This was no different from letting Barsa punch the air. These fireballs seemed to have been dispersed by the shadow arrow, but in reality, they drew bright and blazing arcs in the air. Before the shadow arrow could reach its target, the fireballs had already landed on Barsa's body. Bang, 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 bang. The continuous explosions turned into a long explosive sound. Indeed, the fireball that was infused with such a low concentration of magic power couldn't hurt Barsa directly. However, the fireball didn't only deal elemental damage. The impact from the explosion was unavoidable. As an old warlock who wasn't particularly powerful, Barca could totally summon a void devil and sacrifice it. Then he would disintegrate it and turn it into a shield to protect himself. If that was the case, even if Duque used another 10,086 fireballs, it wouldn't be of any use, let alone 108 fireballs. However, Barca was more arrogant than Duque, so he wasn't willing to use such a method to obtain victory. It's just a low-level spell, so I'll just have to take it head-on. That was what Barca thought. Of course, he didn't know that it was Duque's soul energy, one of the 7 major sins, pride, that was affecting him at the same time. In the end, under the gaze of thousands of orcs, Barca was beaten up badly. Laugh. Laugh. Wait for my shadow arrow to hit him. Both Barca and Duque didn't expect that there would be a third party involved in this seemingly one-on-one duel. The name of the third party was the System Elf. What should I do? What should I do? After the simulation, there are 98 seconds left before the host's Flame Blast will lose its effect, and he will be killed by the opponent's Dark Attribute arrow attack. According to my calculations, if the host is killed by a warlock who uses demonic energy, there's a high chance that the host will completely lose his humanity and become a ghoul after resurrection. If the host completely loses his rationality, the System Elf will also be finished. Originally, it's my principle not to interfere with the host's decisions. However, the host has lost his rationality. Yes, I can activate the emergency plan to protect the host. No one noticed that a mage's hand had appeared between the orc warlock's loose mage robe and cloak. This hand didn't use any kind of spell to attack. According to the calculations of the System Elf, with Duque's current level, any spell attack would be ineffective against the orc warlock. Therefore, the System Elf very treacherously picked up the broken sword of a human warrior on the ground and quickly stabbed it from behind. Chapter 85. Intense explosions were happening all around them. The strong shockwave escaped the senses of the orc warlock. He did not expect that the arrogant human in front of him would stab him in the back. Of course, he did not expect that it was a System Elf who did it on his own. Therefore, when he felt a sharp sword avoid his left shoulder and stab into his heart, his face was full of disbelief. He wanted to scold, but the System Elf was afraid that he would not die. It twisted the sword around his heart a few times, almost cutting him into mincemeat. Everything was covered up by the explosion, and no one knew about it. The orcs who had retreated a long time ago looked at the warlock on their side with anticipation. However, they soon realized that something was wrong. The menacing shadow arrow lost its aim halfway through its flight. It tilted to one side and shot into the mountain, dyeing a large area of the mountain black. However, the mysterious human's fireballs bombarded Balsa's body one after another. After about 1/3 of the fireballs were used up, Balsa's defense began to fade. After 2/3 of the fireballs, the magic on the surface of Balsa's body had completely dissipated. However, the high-purity magic that flowed in his body was still resisting the low-purity magic from the flame blast. To the orc warriors, it was a completely different matter. This human was so cruel. He could have killed Balsa with a powerful fireball, but he had to create more than 100 fireballs and throw them at him one by one. This was clearly torture. After the last fireball was thrown at Balsa, the orc warlock, who was full of unwillingness and was burnt black, finally breathed his last. In order to cover up what it had done, the System Elf obediently snatched Balsa's magic staff with the magician's hand, before the flames completely engulfed Balsa. Duque, who had regained his senses, realized that his System Elf had given him the magic staff as a trophy, as if it was a treasure. Duque was stunned at first, then he laughed hysterically. The arrogant laughter stimulated the orcs' nerves again. They did not understand the battle of magic spells. However, they knew that the other party had played the trick of killing the general and capturing the flag. It was also this black-robed human who had destroyed their dream of killing the big shots on the human side. Unknowingly, these brave orc warriors were afraid. Ha ha ha. Who else? Who else? Duque seemed to be affected by the aftermath of pride, as he waved the orc warlock's skeletal staff in an extremely arrogant manner. Looking at the tens of thousands of orcs hesitating to advance, Duque laughed maniacally. He raised his black cloak with one hand and turned around to enter the fortress. A minute passed. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed. Not a single chief or orc dared to take a step forward to check if Duque had left. Suddenly, a huge and ferocious figure rushed out from the back of the orc army. Like a bird startled by a ferocious beast, the orcs scattered in all directions. What are you doing? My order is for you to attack. Attack. Attack again. Annihilate all human warriors in sight. What are you guys daydreaming about? Had they killed all the humans? Where is the human chieftain's head? It was the tribe's chief in name, Black Hand the Destroyer. No, we that. Black Hand finally understood what had happened from the little tribal chief's intermittent narration. What? You bunch of trash that tarnished the tribe's honor. Without giving the little tribal chief a chance to explain himself, the huge war hammer drew a terrifying arc in the air and smashed into the little tribal chief's head with an indescribable force. The upper half of the orc chief's body was smashed into minced meat. Waving the bloodied war hammer, Black Hand pointed angrily at the top of the mountain. The great tribe does not need cowardly orcs. Go after them. Driven by the chief's anger, the once stagnant green torrent began to surge once again. The orcs almost destroyed all the human buildings they could see. After passing through the fortress at the top of the mountain, they arrived at the back of the mountain. The orcs saw the human army's tail. They were moving at a slow speed into the forest at the foot of the mountain. Starting from the forest, that was the boundary of the elven forest. Chase! Behind them was the chief. Firstly, the orcs had lost their path of retreat. Secondly, they were ashamed of their cowardice just now. They roared angrily and waved their battle axes and war hammers as they poured down from the mountain. The orcs' strange movements naturally alarmed Lothar, who was at the back. He and General Seamus, who had just regrouped, looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Seamus said, "What a terrifying lord. Not only is he extremely powerful, but he also knows the movement patterns of those green-skinned monsters so well." Lothar was about to say something when he suddenly saw a cavalry rushing towards him. Lothar could tell that it was a noble's cavalry, and the leader was Duke Bolvar for Dragon. "Oh, Thoradin the Great above Lothar! You've survived!" Bolvar did not hide his ecstasy. He reined in the horse that was panting heavily and jumped down to give Lothar a big hug. The sound of two real men's armor clashing was so pleasant to the ear. "I thought I was going to die too." Lothar was also very moved to see Bolvar risking his life to help. As the highest commander of the retreating army, and a duke of high status, Bolvar could have just left or sent his subordinates to receive him. But Bolvar had come, and he'd gathered all the private cavalry of the nobles. Looking around at the rather pitiful Griffin Legion soldiers, Bolvar's eyes grew moist. "You've done very well." Bolvar turned his gaze to the torrent pouring down from the mountain. "You guys retreat first. I'll help you launch a counterattack before they descend the mountain and enter the forest." It was not a good idea to charge towards the high ground on horseback. Under normal circumstances, this would be the only way to protect the Griffin Legion. Seamus spoke at this moment. He pointed at the black dot floating down the mountain before the green flood. "It seems that there's no need for that. That lord is here." Bolvar noticed that Lothar had a clear expression of relief on his face. "Which lord?" Lothar sighed. He called himself the Hundred-Handed Reaper Huijia in the mage's message. "He's the teacher of that Duke Marcus." Seamus added, "A very powerful high-ranked mage." Chapter 86. Lothar patted young Bolvar's shoulder. "Let's go. We'll talk about the details later." Since Lord Huijia was able to delay the orcs for so long, he must have a backup plan. Backup plan? Bolvar's curiosity was about to explode. "Let's go first," Lothar said without hesitation. The Griffin Legion and Bolvar's 300 cavalry rushed through the forest before the orc army could charge down the mountain. They followed the pontoon and wooden bridges that had been set up beforehand and crossed a river with a rather low water level. Feeling the moist spring air and looking at the low water level, Lothar fell into deep thought. The orcs were here. When Lothar and the last soldier of the Griffin Legion crossed the pontoon bridge and stepped onto the opposite shore, the already deafening roars of the orcs suddenly rose to a new level. The ear-piercing screams of the orcs pierced the eardrums of Lothar, Bolvar, and the others. A green wave, even more terrifying than the one at the Redridge Mountains, squeezed out from the small forest they had just passed. From every gap in the trees, there were roaring orcs charging out with weapons. There were simply too many of them. Lothar had no choice but to turn his head to look at the rapidly expanding front line of the orcs. It was still that majestic aura that could swallow mountains and rivers. Young Bolvar didn't feel much, but Lothar and Seamus narrowed their eyes and looked seriously at the messy flags that looked like scribbles. Their expressions changed once more. Damn it, the greenskins have increased their numbers. Even though Lothar couldn't really tell, he instinctively felt that there were at least 30% more flags that he hadn't seen before. Exchanging glances with Seamus, they knew what they had to do. Whether it was according to the agreement or military common sense, they couldn't retreat any longer. The Griffin Legion once again carried out their mission to cut off the retreat. 1,500 soldiers formed 3 rows of 500 people along the shore, just after they left the river. The soldiers who weren't too heavily injured struggled to climb down from the vehicle. They practically used their bodies to support themselves as they stood behind their comrades, forming the frail 4th row. At this moment, Lothar suddenly realized that Duque had already floated through the forest and was gently floating in front of him. Lothar knew that this was the mage's slow fall spell, but to be able to use it so accurately, this mysterious mage's strength was unfathomable. "Hello, Your Excellency Huijia." Lothar took the initiative to greet him. "Hello, Sir Lothar. It seems that we have established a preliminary level of trust." Among the backup plans that Duque had agreed on, Lothar was also to form a formation on the riverbank slightly away from the river. Duque asked in an old voice, "You don't seem to be worried that I'll harm you now?" "It's nothing. At most, I'll just lose my life again for the same reason." Noxus revealed a hearty smile. "Also, I don't believe that you would harm me, because we are both humans." "Yes, because we are all humans." Strangely, these two people, who were at least 20 years apart in age, easily found common ground. "How was the battle with the spellcaster just now?" Lothar was all smiles when he saw Duque appear. The result was certain. The only question was how much he would win. Duque did not say anything. He threw out the orc warlock's skull staff that emitted evil energy. The vengeful spirit on the staff seemed to have absorbed the blood of the ferocious beasts and became less violent, but it was still menacing. "Take it back to the high-ranking priest in Stormwind City. I think there will be people on your side who will be interested." Hiss! Lothar, Seamus, and Fordragon all secretly gasped at the same time. Battles between mages were indeed extremely mysterious. But everyone knew that it was one thing to defeat the opponent. Killing the other party was another matter. Killing the opponent was more than twice as difficult as defeating the opponent. Now this mysterious Huijia actually performed the mage's version of killing the general and capturing the flag under the watchful eyes of tens of thousands of orcs? What kind of power was this? They thought of how Duque had suppressed 2 waves of orcs' frenzied attacks by himself and saved the entire Griffin Legion. Then, they thought of how he killed the enemy's powerful spellcaster in front of the formation this time. The 3 couldn't help but raise their evaluation of Duque countless times. However, Duque's performance wasn't over yet. Seeing that the fastest orcs had already rushed to the shore and were about to enter the water, Lothar and the others suddenly felt their hearts in their mouths. The water of this long river wasn't deep. For humans, the water didn't reach their waists, but for the tall and burly orcs, it was only as deep as their thighs. It wasn't a problem at all. If the orcs were allowed to charge, it wouldn't take more than a few minutes for the vanguard of the orc army to cross the river and engage the Griffin Legion. Feeling the gazes of the 3 military bigwigs, Duque smiled lightly and then raised his right hand towards the orcs. In the void, 24 hands of magic appeared. They had the same posture as Duque's right hand. 6 seconds of chanting seemed like a long time, but in the face of an army, it was equivalent to a short instant. Under the gaze of Lothar and the others, 12 fireballs were sent flying. They flew crookedly into the sky and blossomed into fireworks like balls of fire. The other 12 shot into the forest on the other side, instantly igniting the forest. These 12 fireballs were a perfect demonstration of what was called dry wood and raging fire. And the fire actually spread all at once. The orcs who drank the demon's blood were very violent and very brave. But that didn't mean that they were completely irrational berserkers. There were still too many things that they would instinctively fear, such as flames. Countless orcs turned into running humanoid torches in the blink of an eye. They either rolled on the ground in pain, or, under the leadership of the smarter ones, frantically rushed into the river to put out the fire on their bodies. Lothar stared dumbfounded at the scene in front of him, his mouth quivering, and finally asked his question. It's still spring, and when we passed through the forest just now, it was still very wet. Duque rolled his eyes at Lothar. I can temporarily turn several miles of land into a tundra. Why can't I dry up that small forest a little? Seamus, Bolvar, Lothar, they were all stupefied. What a terrifying amount of magic power. Was this guy really human? That's right. Duque was using Darson's scorching furnace. His magic power wasn't enough to heat the entire forest to the point of spontaneous combustion, but he could still dry it a little. This was the greatest benefit of inheriting the Sun King's arcane fire circuit. Even though he wasn't a true sky wizard, 3 months of seclusion had allowed Duque to possess a terrifying amount of magic power that far exceeded most sky wizards. Even compared to many Morning Star wizards, Duque's magic power was not inferior in the slightest. Duque's fire stratagem was indeed impressive. At a glance, at least 2,000 or 3,000 orcs were buried in the sea of fire. However, compared to Duque's flawless performance, the corners of Lothar's eyes twitched as he watched the thousands of orcs rush into the river to escape. Chapter 87. That's right. After putting out the flames on their bodies, these crude fellows had already stood up and were laughing at Duque. The beastmen were laughing. Duque was laughing as well. But Duque's laughter was even more carefree and joyful. Lothar suddenly noticed that Duque's eyes were filled with concern for an idiot. What? Was there a backup plan? Lothar was startled. Lothar's guess was right. There really was a backup plan. Did you hear something? Bolvar, who had the best hearing, was the first to ask. In the next moment, not only did Lothar and Seamus hear it, but the rest of the Griffin Legion did as well. At this time, Duque said slowly, Lothar, you'd better have your men retreat another 50 yards. 50 yards was equivalent to retreating into the forest. From a tactical point of view, retreating into the forest was equivalent to not having a formation. But when he thought of how low the water level had been, Lothar understood what Duque had done. It was the spring flood season, and the river should be rising. Normally, the water level shouldn't be this low. There was only one explanation. Duque had ordered his men to build a dam at Steel Lake upstream of the river, to hold back the water. This was done after the entire Stormwind army had passed through and entered the Redridge Mountains. Thinking of how Duque had secretly used the workers from the East Cove lumberyard, it wasn't hard for Lothar to guess that it was these workers who had helped build the dam. Terrifying. Too terrifying. Who would have thought that this mysterious old magus was not only powerful, but also so resourceful? If he wanted to ambush the Stormwind army, not a single one of them would be able to escape. While Lothar cheered in his heart, he was also secretly shocked. Thankfully, this magus isn't an enemy of Stormwind. Lothar hurriedly ordered his men to retreat. For a well-trained army, this wasn't a problem. 10 seconds later, the Griffin Legion's warriors were secretly delighted to see the beastmen, who had been laughing at them, suffer. With an earth-shaking rumbling sound that could destroy the mind of any tribal warrior, a raging wave that could blot out the sky and cover the earth swept down from the upper reaches of the river. It was mixed with countless debris and the anger of human beings, pouring down in a furious manner. Before the Horde invaded the world of Azeroth, the Bloodring clan was once the most powerful clan in the Horde. Now the Bloodring clan was still one of the top clans in the Horde. Under the leadership of old Kilrog Deadeye, the Bloodrick clan possessed the indomitable wildness necessary for many years of successful campaigns. For example, attacking the Dreenii Shatrath city. According to the original history, based on their invincible performance in battle, the Bloodring clan was given the responsibility of defending the territory of the dwarves that was previously occupied, the Cosmodan area, and was given the task of attacking the dwarves' old nest, the Iron Furnace Fort. It could be said that these experienced Bloodring warriors, who were loyal to the largest clan in the tribe, the Blackrock clan, were definitely one of the tribe's most precious treasures. But now, this army that had joined the front lines under the orders of the great chief, Black Hand, was almost completely annihilated. The few remaining green flags couldn't even barely hold on under the great power of nature. In the blink of an eye, they were completely swallowed up by the flood that was mixed with large amounts of sharp wooden stakes. Of course, this wasn't where all the elites of the Bloodring clan were. But Kilrogg would probably feel the pinch from losing such an elite vanguard army here. The army that had been swept up in the flood was famous within the horde. From upstream to downstream, Duque roughly counted 4 or 5 of them. Other than the Bloodring clan, Duque managed to recognize the larger clans such as the Blackrock, Shatterpalm, and Dragonmaw. It had to be known that during the first incident at the Dark Portal, the entire tribe had turned out in full force. Most of these were elite veterans who had just experienced the war with the Dreenii. If any one of these large clans were to enter the Stormwind, which had not seen a great war for hundreds of years, it would be enough to destroy this small human kingdom. It had to be known that in the original history, it wasn't just the Stormwind that defeated the horde. Instead, it took the help of 7 human kingdoms, dwarves, and some elves to defeat the horde. Therefore, from the beginning, Duque didn't think that his efforts in the Stormwind alone would be enough to completely defend against the horde's attack. What Duque could do was to bleed the horde as much as possible before the final battle. Today was the first step. In the original history, these vanguards who invaded the Azeroth would all die. But today, Duque had completed their fate in another way. Countless orcs wailed and screamed, trying to escape this death trap before the flood arrived. Unfortunately, they weren't Naga, nor were they merfolk. The orcs who could run as fast as they could on the mountains became incomparably clumsy in the water, and were quickly swept away by the flood. The flood wasn't particularly fatal to the strong orcs, but the sharp wooden stakes in the flood were quite fatal. The orcs had all squeezed into the water to avoid the fire, and the result was that a single stake could often skewer several orcs. In a few blinks of an eye, the orc army that had been incomparably strong just a moment ago was scattered. That wasn't all. Noxus saw that there were many large ships coming down the river along with the flood. The human sailors on the ships were beating drums and throwing javelins at the orcs, who had luckily escaped the disaster. Seeing the scene before him, Noxus had already lost the ability to speak. At this time, Duque slowly turned around. Go! The Griffin Legion needs the enemy's head as a sacrifice to their comrades. Seeing the previously aggressive orcs turn into drowning dogs, Noxus actually felt a little disappointed. This wasn't the opponent he wanted. Bolvar stepped forward and patted Noxus' shoulder plate. We all know how strong these green-skinned creatures are. The elven forest can't be defended, and the nobles who have lost their territory need a place to vent. I don't want the Griffin Legion to become a target. Noxus quivered, and immediately came to a realization. Yes, he was indeed an outstanding commander, but he definitely wasn't an outstanding politician. In terms of tactics, the Griffin Legion had already done their best. So what? With the Redridge Mountain lost, the soldiers of Stormwind City couldn't possibly be a match for the orcs in the forest, where individual strength was the most important. The nobles who had lost their territory would naturally choose to vent their anger. It was obvious that the Griffin Legion, who hadn't fought well, was the best scapegoat. Noxus couldn't bear to see them being blamed by the nobles after making such a huge sacrifice. Even the compensation would be deducted. Fortunately, if they could bring back enough orc heads, it would be the best proof of the Griffin Legion's bravery. Noxus suddenly waved his sword. Griffin Legion, advance. Kill those green-skinned beasts that have come ashore. Chapter 88. Noxus could clearly feel the sword in his hand trembling from his rage. The blood-stained blade that he hadn't even had time to wipe off glowed with his will. Was it his determination to defend the human world? Was it his unwillingness to accept the shackles of the nobles? Was it his resistance against his impending fate? Noxus himself wasn't sure, but he knew that the unyielding soul burning within his body was telling him that he and his subordinates needed to drink the blood of the orcs. Duque smiled as he watched Noxus lead the Griffin Legion to charge at the orc survivors, who were frantically climbing up the river bank. No one could swim with hammers and axes that weighed dozens of kilograms. Although the orcs were strong, they had been ambushed and had lost their weapons. How could they gain the upper hand against the fully armed Griffin Legion? They continued to roar, launching fierce attacks at the human warriors, even though they were barehanded. It was a pity that they lacked the heavy hammers and axes that could easily shatter shields. Their attacks weren't much stronger than the wild beasts in the forest. Shield attacks. Mass stabs of swords and spears. Every 5 or 6 warriors formed a small battle group, and they efficiently harvested the lives of the orc warriors. Balver's cavalry, who had just joined the battle, did the most damage. They charged downstream at high speed and wantonly killed the orcs on the river bank. A little upstream from where the orcs had crossed the river, the fire was almost unable to spread in the wet forest. Suddenly, there was a shocking tremor, and many large trees were easily felled. Surrounded by a group of extremely strong orcs, the tribe's chief, Black Hand, the destroyer, arrived at the river bank. When the last tree blocking his line of sight was felled by his personal guards, the tragic state of the tribe was reflected in the chief's eyes. Tragic. Too tragic. Thousands of tribal warriors fell by the side of this unknown river forever. Many of them had been pierced to death by the large number of sharp wooden stakes that had rushed down from the river. A small number had drowned, but most had been shot to death by javelins or surrounded by the human soldiers on the other side of the river. On the other side of the river, the one-sided slaughter continued. The surging waves that were dozens of meters wide prevented Black Hand from sending reinforcements. Roar! Black Hand let out a furious roar from the other side of the river. Apart from that, he was completely powerless. He could only watch as the orcs on the other side of the river continued to fight fervently, but they were still being slaughtered helplessly. There was a striking similarity in history. The two men who were destined to become mortal enemies, the future Azeroth Lion Anduin Lothar, and the current deputy of the great chieftain, Orgrim Doomhammer. Their gazes met in the void across the entire river. This was a very mysterious feeling. It was a premonition that only one of them could survive. It was hard to describe. Of course, for Black Hand, who was standing beside Orgrim, it felt like Anduin was looking at him at this moment. Black Hand let out a deafening roar when he saw Anduin stepping on the back of an orc who was struggling. Puny humans! If you still dare to kill orc warriors, I will cut off your head and use it as a urinal. Of course, Black Hand was shouting in orc language. It did not hinder Lothar and the Griffin Legion soldiers who were across the river from him. All of a sudden, hundreds of people looked at Lothar. Lothar wiped his bloodied face with his left hand and grinned at Black Hand. Anyone could tell that it was a sarcastic smile. In the next second, he grabbed the struggling orc's head with one hand and cut its throat with the sharp sword. Then, he swung the sword back and forth forcefully to cut off the orc's head. Lothar raised the bloody and ferocious-looking orc's severed head high in his left hand and roared back at Lothar in a loud voice. Go to hell, orcs! Long live the King of Rin! Long live the Stormwind! Long live the humans! Almost all the human soldiers were imitating Lothar. They either raised the severed head in their hands or raised their swords that were stained with blood. All of a sudden, the side of the river became hell for the orcs and heaven for the human soldiers. Go to hell, orcs! Long live the King of Rin! Long live the Stormwind! Long live the humans! With lofty sentiments and a spirit that could swallow mountains and rivers, the angry roars of the humans that rejected the invaders soared into the sky. After the orderly shouting, there were all kinds of sarcasm and laughter. Ha ha! Go to hell, greenskin monsters! I'll kill everyone that comes. We're not afraid of you, you brute. The provocation of the humans was beyond words. The great chief, Blackhand's green face was very dark. The huge warhammer smashed into a tree next to him. The huge force smashed the entire trunk into pieces, and the broken pieces even injured the orcs next to it. However, he really could not do anything. On the shore, Duque did not attack again. His magic power was almost exhausted. Although the arcane fire circuit was still continuously providing him with magic power, he could clearly feel his spiritual power weakening. Today he had done very well. Even though the total combat power of the orc army was still strong, he knew that he had done the best he could. In the dark, the long river of fate suddenly lit up with a little light. That light was so weak compared to the entire long river that it was not even considered bright in the light of fate of the billions of creatures in the entire Azeroth. But after all, Duque had cast a new fire seed of fate on this land that was about to fall into the dark rule of the orcs. Perhaps this fire seed would be extinguished. Perhaps at the right time, the fire of hope would extend out from this fire seed and burn all the claws of the demons. No matter what, this was the first time that Duque had tried to change the flow of fate. It seemed that it was quite successful. In this battle, Stormwind lost. Whether it was in terms of tactics or strategy, the defending army led by Lothar was a failure. A total of 3,000 elite soldiers of the Griffin Legion, and the same number of garrison troops, were forever sleeping at the pass of the Red Ridge Mountain. And their failure also caused Stormwind to be strategically passive. There was no place to defend. In this life, the water of the stone tablet lake benefited more than in the game. Duque played with fire and water at the same time. But this still could not reduce the orcs' advantage in combat. After a short loss, Gul'dan sent out more tribes to invade the Elven Forest from multiple fronts. Their attacks were definitely faster and fiercer than what Duque knew in the history. But that was not something that Duque could control. The soldiers of the Griffin Legion returned to Stormwind City after a few days. In this era, people had a very direct way of expressing their feelings towards the returning army. People would not be stingy with their praise and enthusiasm for the victorious army. As for the defeated dogs, people would give them the cruelest of curses. They should have cursed and mocked them, but towards the Griffin Legion, their expressions were very complicated. Chapter 89. The Griffin Legion before them didn't look like a defeated army at all. Even though they were riddled with wounds, many of them needing the support of their comrades to walk. Even though their armor was full of large gaps or large dents caused by heavy objects, they were still able to move their armor. Even though they shouldered the great crime of losing at Red Ridge Mountain, and were blamed by countless nobles and commoners for their defeat, still the people couldn't bear to mock and curse them like they were the losers. It was simple. Carts after carts of orc heads accompanied them back. Even though the heads had been simply cured with lime, they still looked unspeakably terrifying. The people could clearly see the orcs' bulging eyes, their sharp fangs that seemed like they could tear a person apart in one bite, and the terrifying rings used as decoration on the fangs. The people could also see the enormous bodies of the orcs being transported back. Large numbers of orc axes and war hammers were displayed in the busy streets. When even the strongest of men couldn't easily wield these heavy weapons, the people finally realized what kind of terrifying monsters the warriors of Griffin Legion were fighting against. The streets of Stormwind City went from silence at first to sparse applause, then to thunderous cheers and applause in the end. The young warriors of Griffin Legion had experienced the greatest ups and downs of many people's lives. Well done. Good job, Griffin Legion. You've done your best. Without your bravery, the situation might have been even worse. For the first time in the history of Stormwind City, a large number of people were giving flowers and applause to the defeated army. At some point the first warrior started crying. Then came the second, and the third. Men didn't easily shed tears. They were defeated. But they were also victors. Their tactics and strategies had failed, but they had at least overcome their fear and survived the trial of iron and fire. Anduin Lothar, Tom Seamus, and Bolvar for Dragon walked through the corridors of Stormwind Stronghold, feeling the gazes of the guards. Even though they had lost the battle, the guards had only now begun to view them as legends. Even before they entered the chamber, they could hear the clamor of voices squeezing through every crack in the door and every crevice. The nobles, who used to be so high and mighty that even speaking loudly was seen as uncultured, were using their loudest voices to ask the king to send troops to punish the evil orcs who had taken over Stormwind's territory in the most bloody way possible. The gate, which was as tall as 2 people, opened. The entire place fell silent. The air seemed to have frozen, and all sounds were locked in place. Unlike the simplest and purest civilians, many nobles had a more direct view of Lothar, hatred. They didn't care how hard Noxus fought, nor did they care that more than 60% of the Griffin Legion had died. They only knew that it was precisely because of Lothar's defeat that they had turned from nobles with real power to nobles with no home to return to. And this group of border nobles who had lost their territories were also the fiercest in front of King Lang. Seeing that Lothar and the others had entered, the nobles were ready to make trouble. King Lang Ren expressed his support for Lothar in the most direct way. He left the throne excitedly, strode down the stairs, and rushed to the door of the conference room. He gave Lothar a big hug. "Damn orcs. I almost lost you forever." Thousands of words were all contained in this one sentence. There was no "well done," or "I don't blame you for trying your best." Lang only cared about the safety of his childhood friend. Anduin patted Lang's back hard. His eyes were also slightly watery, but he controlled his emotions. "Your Majesty, Anduin Lothar is back." He was reminding Lang that they were in a public place. Lang immediately came to his senses. He let go of Lothar and said loudly, "Welcome back, my commander. Welcome back, Duke for Dragon General Seamus." In the face of the king's public support, the nobles had to swallow their words, even if they wanted to make things difficult for Lothar. Lang sat down again. "All right, everyone, and I have seen the report. As the ones who personally fought against the green-skinned monsters, Lothar or Bolvar, who can tell us how powerful those monsters are?" Bolvar was the first to bow. "No amount of words can describe the violence of these monsters. Let everyone see for themselves." Bolvar clapped his hands, and the door of the conference room opened again. Along with the stench of blood, a barbaric aura that seemed to have come from ancient times rushed out. 2 guards pushed in a huge cage with wheels. Around the cage were 12 fully armed guards of the Wang clan, each of them holding a shield and an unsheathed sword. After seeing the huge and burly figure in the cage, almost all of the nobles in the conference room felt their eyelids twitch violently. Some of the more timid ones even let out a cry of surprise. Bolvar continued to introduce, "This is the green-skinned monster that we fought in the Redridge Mountains. We will call it the Orc for now." With a wave of Bolvar's hand, the cage was immediately opened. 6 incomparably strong men with bulging muscles stepped forward and pulled on the shackles on the beastman's wrists and ankles. They lowered their bodies and prepared to exert their strength. Lothar gently pulled out his sword and stepped forward to block half of Lang's body. Their large formation made Lang and most of the nobles, who had never seen an orc, frown. Bolvar nodded at the royal court mage who was guarding Lang. "Master, you can remove the sleeping curse from this orc now." Lang nodded. The court mage softly chanted a few spells, and the orc clearly moved. "Arg!" The next moment, a roar that sounded like that of a prehistoric beast rang out, causing several nobles to lose their chairs and fall to the side. Without any questions or probing, the orc who had consumed the demonic blood immediately attacked the nearest human. His outburst was so fast that the 6 strongmen couldn't stop him in time. One of the men who could not stand steadily on his horse was even dragged in front of the orc. The orc moved quickly, but the royal guards were even faster. Almost at the same time, 7 or 8 swords had already pierced into the orc's body. Seeing that the orc was not going to live, the ferocious orc once again displayed his ferocity to the upper echelons of Stormwind. He opened his mouth full of fangs and bit down on the man's shoulder, tearing off a fist-sized piece of flesh. Immediately, the man became a bloody mess. Fortunately, the man tilted his head at the critical moment, or else he would not have been bitten on the shoulder, but on the neck. The orc quickly breathed his last. In the huge conference room, only the low moans of the man and the pungent smell of blood could be heard. Chapter 90. If it had been any other day, there might have been people blaming Bolvar for creating such a bloody scene. Now no one said a word, for the kingdom was in a state of war. Compared to the nobles who knew nothing about the orcs before, they now had a simple and straightforward understanding of their strength. They began to understand why the vast territory of the kingdom had fallen in the blink of an eye. They began to understand why the elite army that had been trained could not withstand a single blow. It was obvious that it was because of the difference in race. There was an innate difference in combat power between humans and orcs. While the servants cleaned up the scene, the nobles split into small groups and whispered to each other. King Lang was also asking his ministers for their opinions. "You're saying that it usually takes 3 elite warriors to kill a single orc?" Lang did not hide his surprise. "I thought the report was exaggerated." A duke interrupted. "If that's the case, how do we fight?" "There's no way to fight. In terms of pure hand-to-hand combat, even 20 soldiers with weapons would not be a match for a single orc." Noxus added with lingering fear. "If it wasn't for the spells and strategies of the mysterious Archmage, hundred-handed death god, this would have been the greatest defeat since the founding of Stormwind." Hundred-handed death god? The report you sent mentioned that he seemed to be the teacher of that Duke Marcus. "How strong is he?" Lang was a little happy, but also a little doubtful. "I can't tell, but he was able to repel the siege of thousands of orcs, and even killed the enemy's evil spellcaster, and took his staff. I think he should be very strong, but only the Archmage has the right to speak." Noxus asked his servant to pass the orc warlock's staff wrapped in talismans to the court mage beside Lang. The old mage looked at it carefully and muttered to himself, "Even I don't have the confidence to kill the owner of this staff in a one-on-one fight. Not to mention facing the entire orc army by himself. I dare not say anything else, but at least the previous owner of this staff had strength equivalent to that of a peak sky mage. But with such strange evil power, this orc should not be inferior to a morning star mage in actual combat." Lang, Bolvar, Anduin, and the rest all felt their hearts skip a beat. To be able to kill a morning star wizard so easily, wouldn't he be at least a radiant moon wizard? In the entire world of Azeroth, there were very few powerful mages. Naturally, the strongest was the Guardian Medivh. Under Medivh, there were only 2 Breaking Dawn mages that were generally acknowledged by the world: the Dalajan Great Master Antonidas, and the Kuel Salis High Elven Sun King Anastrian. Although there were quite a few Radiant Moon mages, there were at most 10 of them, and most of them were members of the Tirisful Council. Unfortunately, Stormwind didn't have a single Radiant Moon mage. An existence that was likely to be a Radiant Moon mage was enough to make people tremble, but a master tactician as well. The series of fire and water attacks broadened the horizons of these generals, who only knew how to fight head-on. Now that they suddenly heard that Duque had such an amazing teacher, Lang and the rest's evaluation of Duque rose by leaps and bounds. It turned out that a great teacher produced a great disciple. No one would have thought that Duque would have such a trick up his sleeves. He was the teacher, and he was the disciple. They would only think that the reason why Duque was able to make such a name for himself as the Sea King was because he had an expert guiding him from behind the scenes. King Lang asked tentatively. Noxus said that His Excellency Huijia has the mage imprint of the royal family mages. The old court mage shook his head. The emblem of the royal family mages is just a simple way to distinguish between friend and foe. For powerful mages, this kind of ordinary arcane emblem is easy to imitate. This doesn't prove anything. Lang was obviously disappointed. After losing Medivh, he suddenly heard that the other side also had a mysterious and powerful spellcaster. The need for mages made Lang instinctively yearn for a more powerful mage to rely on. What a pity! The servants cleaned up the meeting hall, and the hall fell into a mix of emotional and rational arguments. In fact, everyone knew that it was impossible to win with just Stormwind. Preliminary estimates put the number of orcs at no less than 100,000. According to the battle casualty ratio of 1 to 3, even if all the adult men in Stormwind were counted as elites, it would not be enough to kill them. But it was impossible to give up the territory of Elven Forest just like that. As the core of the entire kingdom, more than 70% of Stormwind's citizens lived in Elven Forest. If all the citizens were to move to Stormwind City to seek refuge, just the food problem alone would make Lang's hair turn white. The only good thing is that we opened up the sea route. Now food from the western wilderness can be continuously transported to Stormwind City through the sea route, temporarily filling up the food shortage in Stormwind City. It would have been better if Bolvar had not mentioned it. Now that he mentioned it, Lang could not help but think of Duque's kindness. There's no other way. We'll ask for help from the other major human kingdoms. These green-skinned creatures will soon not only be a matter of our kingdom, but a disaster for the entire human world, and even the world of Azeroth. Lang's words unfortunately hit the nail on the head. The huge orc army had long been dissatisfied with just half of the Redridge Mountains and one elven forest. Just as the great Mongolian navy's goal was the Sea of Stars, the orcs' goal was the entire world of Azeroth. In addition to attacking Stormwind from the west, the orc army also split up a division to cross the Redridge Mountains and the future Burning Steppes to the north. They crossed the Barren Lands and killed their way to Dan Maluo, in the middle of the Eastern Kingdom's mainland. Yes, the orc army of tens of thousands, led by the Bloodring clan of the tribe, went to find trouble with the dwarves. Not only that, there were also some small tribes who chose to go all the way north, killing their way into the territories of the Kingdom of Torrential Fort, and even the Kingdom of Alterac. Since April, Lang had sent out letters asking for help to all countries, but the response of the countries had been slow. These countries that were thousands of miles away instinctively thought that Lang had seen wrongly, and thought that the trolls were some kind of orc. It was not until July, when the green-skinned orcs appeared indiscriminately in the territories of several human kingdoms, launching attacks on human villages, towns, and even fortresses, that the higher-ups of the various countries suddenly realized that this was a large-scale invasion against the entire continent, and even the entire world. And at this time, more than half of the territory of the Elven Forest in Stormwind had fallen. At this time, a piece of news that shocked all of Stormwind, and even the entire world came. Medivh had officially rebelled, and he had killed the entire council of 6 of Tirisfal. His mother, Aegwyn, rushed to Karazhan, but was also defeated by Sargeras, who already had all the power of a guardian and disappeared. Chapter 91. Night. Late at night. On a balcony in the Storm Fortress, King Lang looked up at the starry sky. In the deep universe, the light of a few stars that were usually bright intertwined with the light of a rising crimson demon star, as if a fierce battle was taking place. Immediately, the huge shadow of the demon star easily shrouded them, and the stars became dim and wobbly. 1, 2, a total of 6 meteors streaked across Lang's vision, and then disappeared into the endless darkness forever. There was also a bright star that had been guarding the sky above the world of Azeroth for thousands of years. This made Lang's mood extremely gloomy. Anduin Lothar came to Lang's side. "Lang, what are you thinking about?" In private, Anduin was not Lang's subject, but a good friend of 30 years. "Anduin, I'm thinking, is our friendship with Medivh just an illusion? Why would he do such a thing? If he really wants this kingdom, I can consider giving it to him." Why? Lothar was always mindful of his duties. Before becoming Medivh's good friend, he was the most loyal subject of King Lang. Hence, when Medivh showed signs of abnormality, he was the first to be on guard. But now that Medivh had openly rebelled, Anduin felt relieved. This allowed him to comfort Lang as a friend. Either we are blind, or Medivh has spent decades deceiving the whole world, or... At this point, Anduin deliberately stopped. "Or what?" Lang asked anxiously. "Or there's a soul in our old friend's body." Anduin spread his hands and explained. "I'm very sensitive to a person's feelings. You know, there's no lack of spirits in this world. Over at the Twilight Forest, I get reports of seeing ghosts every day. So maybe..." Lang heaved a sigh of relief and patted Anduin's shoulder. "Old friend, regardless of whether you're comforting me or speculating, at least I feel much better." Yes. The recent events made Lang feel like the world was about to collapse. The orcs attacked like fire, and half of Stormwind territory had already fallen. Now Stormwind could only control half of the Elven Forest, half of the Twilight Forest, and the Western Wilderness. The Redridge Mountain was practically out of contact. Now that the guardian of the world, Mediv, had betrayed them, as the strongest mage in the world, no one knew who else could deal with Mediv. The stars are dimming. Is the world about to end? Lang muttered to himself. Andoin pointed to the starry sky and said in a heroic voice, "Look, Lang. The stars are shining in the starry sky, but among the stars, some will become brighter, and some will become dimmer before falling. Don't you think that the extinguishing and illuminating of the stars are like the lights of our mortal world? The night will come, and the night will pass. Look, isn't there a new star rising over there?" Lang also noticed that in the sky in the west, there was a dazzling new star that he had never seen before, emitting a bright light. Ah, indeed. Lang suddenly felt much better. Lang, that's right. We may have lost an old friend, but don't we still have a star of hope like Duque? We have to look forward. Yes, you're right. Lang paused and said to Andoin, "Call Marcus to Storm Fortress tomorrow. I think we should listen to his and his teacher's opinions." Lothar pondered for a moment before nodding. Not only Duque, but Duque's teacher, was also extremely mysterious. After saving the remnants of the Griffin Legion and achieving a great victory at the river bank, Lothar returned to find that the 100-handed Reaper had disappeared. He only left a mysterious message for the injured soldiers saying, "Look for Duque when you need me. I'll come when I'm free." He then ran away. The next day Lang summoned Duque. It was a very private small reception room, and there were only 3 people in the entire room: Lang, Andoin, and Duque. There was no splendor, no excessive decorations, and not even a throne. There were only a few extremely simple pieces of furniture and a cup of fragrant black tea. Lang sat on a chair that was exactly the same as the one Duque was sitting on. After not seeing him for a few months, Duque had grown a lot taller. However, Duque did not grow a beard like the others in Storm City. He still chose to shave his beard regularly. "Hello, Your Majesty. May I ask if you summoned me this time to look for me or my master?" Duque went straight to the point. "What's the difference?" Ryan tilted his head, curious. "Yes, if you're looking for my master, then I can go back because I can't find him. He said that he has something important to do that concerns the survival of the entire Azeroth." "I don't know what it is," said Duque, cutting off Lin Li's words in advance. It was fine to pretend to be an old man occasionally, but it wouldn't be good if he was exposed and treated as a fool. Lang smiled. "Are you trying to tell me that the Sea King is Duke Marcus, and not Huijia?" "Your Majesty, you can understand it that way," replied Duque calmly as he took a sip of the fragrant black tea. After transmigrating for so long, the black tea was the only thing that Duque was most comfortable with. "So, to what extent can I trust you? Andoin always told me that you might know a lot, but you won't reveal it to anyone." Lang was not pressing. He gently stretched his body. He was completely looking at Duque's performance to decide how much he would trust Duque. Andoin interrupted. "Since the day Mediv presented the Black Hourglass, I felt that you knew a lot. I'm sorry, but this is an unfounded intuition. But I hope you understand that many people in power can only rely on intuition when they can't find any concrete evidence." Duque knew that Lang and Andoin were forcing him to lay his cards on the table. This was like a watershed. Of course, he could continue to maintain his mysticism, but now that he was betrayed by Mediv, it would be even harder for them to trust outsiders. If that was the case, history was likely to repeat the same mistakes again. Duque decided to be honest, partly because no one would believe what I said at the time. If I told the truth, the only outcome would be being treated as a madman. No matter how wise Your Majesty is, you would only treat me coldly. Duque was so resolute that it made Lang blush. "What did you see?" "In fact, what I saw was long before the Black Hourglass. When I first saw Mediv, I felt a strong demonic aura from Mediv. Sorry, this is a talent. I'm very sensitive to demons." Chapter 92. Hiss! Lang and Andoin gasped at the same time. But Duque's shocking words were yet to come. "After I returned, I went to Master's secret library and read a lot of information in private. When Mediv presented the Black Hourglass, I was 60% sure that the one possessing Medivh was the fallen titan, the boss of the Burning Legion, Sargeras. What? Medivh was possessed by Sargeras? They really didn't know whether to be surprised or happy. At this moment, their mouths were filled with mixed feelings. They completely understood why Duque chose to keep his mouth shut and keep it a secret. What was Duque's identity at that time? Even now, if Medivh hadn't exposed himself, they would still be in the dark and wouldn't know that Medivh had betrayed them. After all, a black hourglass couldn't prove anything. Now Duque actually pointed out that it was Sargeras' doing. Lang and Anduin were both happy and afraid. They were happy because their old friend Medivh might not have really betrayed their friendship and the whole of Azeroth. They were afraid because it was Sargeras. As knowledgeable and cultured nobles, of course they knew who Sargeras was and what he had done to the world of Azeroth 10,000 years ago. How are you sure it was Sargeras? Anduin asked tentatively. This is not a secret, and many mages know about it. More than 320 years ago, the previous guardian, Medivh's mother, Aegwynn, went to a magical world. She stopped a group of demons who were hunting dragons, and then encountered the Burning Legion's demon king, Sargeras. Using the power of the strongest mage group in the whole of Azeroth, the 6 members of the Tirisful Council, she defeated the demon king and sealed his body. Sealed? Lothar asked. The specific matters were not recorded in the documents. I guess only the people of the Tirisful Council would know. However, I can tell from that incomparably dark Titan aura that only Sargeras' soul could be so powerful. Even if Duque used an uncertain tone of speculation, Lang and Anduin had already instinctively believed that it was a fact. Because this was the truth, and Duque's words were only a hint to them, they would naturally verify Duque's words through all kinds of information. King Leon's 10 fingers dug deep into his thick hair, and his eyes were a little unfocused. This is bad. If the Demon King steals the Guardian's magic, then the Tirisful Council will fail. Aegwynn will also fail. Doesn't that mean that no one in Azeroth can deal with Sargeras? Oh my god! Stormwind is almost over. How can I, the ruler of a fallen kingdom, face the late Emperor? Anduin had never lacked courage, but at this moment, his face was ashen. At this moment, the whole meeting room seemed to be under a spell that stopped time. Duque stood up proudly under the stunned gaze of Lang and Anduin. He raised his head and said softly, "No need to say more, Your Majesty. Things can still be salvaged. Please be confident." Confidence may not necessarily win, but without confidence, you will definitely lose. If you don't even have confidence, how can you get the people, the soldiers, and the nobles to support you? Trust you? Since I, Duke Marcus, and Anduin Lothar are standing here, and since there are millions of people who support you, before we all fall, who dares to say that the future of this kingdom is bound to be destroyed? If the destruction of Stormwind is inevitable, then let me change it for you with my own hands. From the moment I knew that things were bad, I have been preparing for this day. I had hoped for countless times that it was just my ineffective effort. But since all of this has really happened, in order to prevent more people from crying, and to stop the grief of the Griffin Legion, who sacrificed their lives in the Red Ridge Mountain, shouldn't we work harder to avoid all of this? Duque's tone was calm and impassioned. After listening to Duque's words, Lang straightened his back and raised his head, almost as if he had been electrocuted. Lang tidied up his appearance and nodded at Duque, who was full of concern. He then smiled bitterly at Duque. "I'm sorry, I've embarrassed myself. As a king, I have to be an example to the people and nobles. I really lost my composure just now. Well, Duque, I think you have thought of many ideas. Take them out at once, don't hide them." Anduin also gave the most sincere smile to Duque. He also realized that Lang had been depressed recently, and did not expect Duque's encouragement to be so effective. "Do you have a map?" Duque asked Lothar. As the supreme commander of the kingdom's military affairs, Lothar always carried a simple map with him. He spread out the map on the coffee table. Duque pointed at the map and said, "First of all, fighting against the entire Orc tribe is not a matter for Stormwind Kingdom alone. Your Majesty, if you can't get reinforcements from the Rotterdam and the Torrent Castle in the short term, You have to be prepared to defend Stormwind City to the death. If there is really such a thing, I strongly suggest that your majesty let the women and children cross the sea to the north first, passing through the dwarven territory of Danmoro, that is also exposed to the orcs' attacks, and directly to the Hillsbrand Hills in the north. Because there, your majesty, you will receive sufficient support from several other human kingdoms. We can transport the women and children back to Stormwind to continue with the military supplies and soldiers. In a situation where the dwarves' Iron Stove Fort was being attacked by the Horde, what Duque said was right. Lang and Anduin nodded at the same time. In fact, in history, the defeated Lothar had also brought the defeated troops and people of Stormwind to do the same thing. However, the situation in Stormwind was not that bad yet, so Duque did not propose a national retreat. Seeing that Lang had agreed, Duque continued, "Secondly, I suggest building a fortress defense line near Gold's Higher Town." Anduin interrupted, "That's useless. We have already proven with blood at the Red Ridge Mountain that a simple fortress can't stop the attack of the orcs." "No, that's because your battle strategy is wrong." Duque took out a blueprint from his arms and handed it to Lothar. "Build it according to my model, and I guarantee that it will be able to continuously bleed the orcs." Lothar was a man who knew how to use weapons. As soon as he saw Duque's blueprint, he immediately agreed. "Thirdly, I strongly suspect that Medivh has a direct connection with the invasion of the orcs. So, I suggest that the two of you consider whether to send a commando team to attack Karazhan directly." Lang's face froze, and he began to stammer. "Medivh is controlled by Sargeras. Yes, he betrayed the world of Azeroth. But what is the direct connection between attacking Karazhan and solving the crisis of the orcs' invasion?" Just as Lang was unable to make a decision because of his feelings, a royal guard knocked on the door and walked in, although he had deliberately lowered his voice. Duque still heard it. "A strange female orc has come. She speaks fluent common language and says that she wants to see His Majesty. She also brought the corpse of Medivh's disciple Khadgar." "What? Khadgar is dead?" Chapter 93. At this moment, Duque felt as if 1,000,000 alpacas were galloping through his heart. He walked back and forth, trampling on Duque's heart. Even though Duque could revive, he would not die as long as he could. Especially after encountering all sorts of strange situations recently, Duque's heart was already ringing with a shrill alarm, and he did not dare to casually seek death anymore. After going through his battle records, Duque discovered that he was in a serious situation of the 7 great sins for the second time. He did not know what the rest of the 7 great sins were, but he could not expect them to be wrath and pride, which were relatively advantageous. In the history that Duque knew, the raid on Karazhan ended with the victory of Khadgar, Lothar and Garona. Khadgar succeeded in stabbing the careless Medivh to death, and became one of the greatest mages in all of Azeroth. In the future, when Stormwind City was rebuilt, there was a huge statue of Khadgar at the city gate. Therefore, in Duque's opinion, an operation like the raid on Karazhan was just following along and winning without doing anything. Now Khadgar, who had given Medivh a fatal blow in history, was dead. That legendary pharaoh Khadgar, who had accompanied Duque on all sorts of quests ever since he set foot on the Draenor continent, had actually died. He could still remember how powerful Khadgar was. During the long process of the quest, Khadgar would occasionally demonstrate to the mage players what was called the pinnacle of magic. He would use a large area of effect freezing air to teach the orcs about manners and how to behave. He would also use a spatial spell to freeze all enemies and leisurely start teaching them. He would also teleport hundreds of people in one go, leaving the players dumbfounded. He would even use a super expert's ice block to assassinate Garona, who would become a legendary assassin in the future. The opponent could only watch helplessly and scram back to where they came from. No matter if it was the players or the people of Azeroth, Khadgar was like an undying lighthouse in a foreign land, silently protecting the peace of their side. To the enemies that threatened Azeroth, whether it was the Burning Legion or the Horde, Khadgar was a nightmare that made them tremble in fear. Duque didn't have any ill will towards Khadgar. He didn't even view Khadgar as a competitor. But such a Khadgar, a future golden coattail, had died? What else could they do? Duque was a little confused. King Lang and Anduin did not feel anything. They weren't prophets, so it was impossible for them to know that Karthika would be so powerful in the future. They were only making the most intuitive judgment. Khadgar was Mediva's disciple, a talented young man who had just become an earth mage. In war, all human lives became cheap, to the point where human lives could be measured in terms of money, combat power, or even numbers. Perhaps to them, the fact that Khadgar, who was as dangerous as living with a tiger, didn't die would make him more of a spy. A female beast woman who speaks fluent common language? Interesting. It was obvious that King Lang was more interested in this. Noxus said objectively, "Indeed, we have many captives, but there's a language barrier, and these beast men are very violent. They either attack the guards with their lives or commit suicide. We have no way of getting any useful information. Until now, we don't know much about the origin, composition, and strength of these beast men." Lang smiled and invited Duque. "All right, my young advisor. Are you interested in coming with us to see what's going on with this beast man?" Of course. If he wasn't wrong, this female beast woman should be the beast man Garona who had killed King Lang. Duke's feelings towards Garona were very strange. From her point of view, she was just a chess piece, a tragic result of a violent beastman warrior and a Draenei woman. She wasn't a bad person, and most of the time, she had the kind heart of a Draenei. However, Duque was clear about what Gul'dan and his Shadow Council had done to Garona. Garona was a puppet. When necessary, Gul'dan could control her body at any time, and make her do all kinds of cruel things against her will when she was conscious. Hence, her kind nature became the perfect disguise for her. The reason why assassins were dangerous was because of their ability to conceal themselves. Although assassins were also divided into assassination and open killing, Duque always felt that the so-called open killing was more like a fierce general who took the head of the enemy's general. Garona was obviously an assassin. In the splendid meeting hall, Lang received Garona. On the right side of King Lang's throne stood Anduin Lothar, and on the left was Bolvar for Dragon. Next to Noxus stood Duque. Seeing how easily Duque gained Lang and Anduin's trust, Bolvar was quite surprised. But now, the focus was on the uninvited female beastman. Duque was also very surprised to see Garona. Unlike his burly appearance in the game, he looked exactly like an ogre. The Garona that he saw with his own eyes had a very enchanting figure. Other than her green skin and a pair of small canine fangs, Garona looked like a wild and beautiful human woman. Only her chest and left shoulder were covered in coarse, cracked leather armor. A mini skirt-length piece of animal skin was tied around her waist. Below her long legs, she was completely barefoot. Her well-toned and streamlined muscles were on full display. She didn't just have mermaid lines. Even her abs were clearly visible. Ignoring the dozen or so guards of the royal family pointing their shining halberds at her, she curiously looked around the magnificent meeting hall. Every chair was exquisitely carved, and the exquisite murals depicting the 7 kingdoms of Azeroth, as well as dwarves, elves, trolls, and other creatures were the focus of her attention. She was like a curious baby, observing everything in the human world. The humans in the meeting hall were also observing her. There was a strange silence in the air. After a while, as if feeling that he could not waste any more time, Noxus finally said, "I heard that you can speak the human language fluently?" "Garona, my name is Garona." Her answer was a little out of place. Khadgar said that humans report their names first. Garona interrupted Noxus directly. "All right, I am Anduin Lothar. Are you the chief of the Storm Clan?" "Storm Clan? Chief?" Noxus' face was full of confusion. No, I am." Noxus was interrupted again before he could finish. "Aren't you the chief? Then I have nothing to say to you." Garona's thoughts were simple and direct. Even Lang could not help but snicker. But as a king, he had to have the dignity of a king. Lang still said loudly, "I am the king of Stormwind, Lang Rin." Chapter 94. Garona tilted her head, seemingly thinking about the meaning of the word king. Lang smiled. If you think that the supreme leader of a force is the chief, all right. I think I'm the chieftain of the Storm Clan as you know it. Garona tilted her head to the other side, her face full of doubt. You don't look like one. The simple and straightforward answer made Lang almost choke to death. This time, it was the two bastards Lothar and Fordragon who snickered. Lang seemed to be quickly examining himself to ensure that his appearance was correct. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with his appearance, he asked, "Why don't you look like one?" "Because you're weaker than Anduin. You're even weaker than the male next to you." Garona pointed at Bolvar. "In our clan, only the strongest warrior is worthy of being the chief." Lang was speechless. Frankly speaking, as a busy king, Lang was also strict with himself and trained his skills every day. Lang dared to say that he could easily defeat the kings of the other 6 human kingdoms. Unfortunately, his strength could not compare to that of Lothar, who was currently recognized as the strongest human. Duque had always thought that if the powerful first-generation paladins were to appear in the future, they might not be able to defeat Lothar without the power of the Holy Light. Moreover, Lothar was now in his 40s, and had long passed the most powerful age of a warrior. In fact, Lothar was still the most powerful at his peak. In order to avoid the awkwardness of the topic, Lothar held back his laughter and stepped forward to smooth things over. We humans do not determine who is the chief purely by force. If there's time in the future, we'll let you understand. Now, shouldn't we get down to business first? I heard that you brought Khadgar's corpse? Ah yes. Khadgar's corpse, which was still warm, was carried in. It was hard to believe that Khadgar was dead when he looked at the soft body that was not stiff and did not have livor mortis spots. Lothar stepped forward and could even feel a faint breath coming from his nostrils. The old court mage by Lang's side examined the corpse and said, "Khadgar is indeed dead. His soul is no longer there. This is the work of a demon." Lothar could only nod. At this moment, Garona said, "I also brought a message from Khadgar before he lost his soul." "Oral message?" "Yes. He said that Mediva's body might have been taken over by a demon, and that it was Mediv who opened the dark door and attracted us orcs." "What?" Lang and Anduin looked as if they had seen a ghost. Duque had just said that he wanted to attack Karazhan, and Garona came to be a witness? If they weren't absolutely sure that Khadgar had been in Karazhan all this time, and that Mediv had betrayed them a long time ago, they would have suspected that Duque had killed Khadgar and sent a female beast woman to testify against him. Duke didn't say anything. He stood there with a wooden expression, a perfect performance of what it meant to be a wooden man. He didn't need to say anything more. As a transmigrator, if he didn't even have the ability to profit from spoilers, then he couldn't be called a transmigrator who was familiar with history. He knew very well what Lang and the others were thinking, but it didn't matter if Lang and the others were in awe of him, or his so-called teacher, the hundred-handed reaper. Anyway, there was only one master and disciple. Whoever gained fame would definitely benefit Duque. There was only one thing on his mind now: how to successfully attack Karazhan and kill Mediv. As Duque had expected, Garona took out a book of evidence. It was a magic book that emitted a strange aura. The protruding cover of the dragon bone ring was glowing with faint arcane energy. The ripples spread out in all directions like ripples on water. All the ripples formed a net, which in turn absorbed the light and heat from the surroundings back into the magic book, forming a subtle small cycle. More importantly, for no reason, everyone felt the aura of fate. It was a very mysterious feeling. It was as if their future and all their hopes were on this book. However, as soon as they were more than a meter away from the book, they couldn't feel anything. This magic book told everyone that it was different from the others in this way. This is the aura that flowed out from the magic book shocked even the court mage that Lang trusted the most. Garona handed the book to the guard, who then presented it to the court mage. Sure enough, Lang and the others saw that there was not only information about astral travel, but also a lot of information about the dark portal. Khadgar even used labels to annotate the key pages. The old court mage muttered to himself, "The information should be real, but my only question now is, There are at least 100,000 magic books in Karazhan's library. How could Emir Khadgar easily find this evidence? Garona was confused. She couldn't understand the doubts of these humans. Didn't Khadgar say that as long as he took out this book, he would be able to convince the chief of the Storm Clan that Medivh was the culprit? At this time, Duque's voice suddenly rang out. Maybe this is a backup plan of the Tirisful Council. I don't believe that the old cunning fellows of the Tirisful Council would be so stupid as to let Medivh capture them all after receiving the warning and not put up any effective resistance. Lang and Andoin both gave Duque a look that said, "You're really amazing." Duque was like a beacon of light in their lives. Every time they were lost, Duque would jump out and point them in the right direction. The old court mage nodded. It's very possible. According to the information I received, Medivh tricked the 6 of them into coming to Karazhan under the name of a powerful demon appearing in Karazhan, and he needed the council's help. But how can we prove this? Can I take a look at the magic book? Duque asked. Lang nodded lightly. So, Duque held the thick magic book and started pacing left and right. Duque couldn't understand the magic book itself. It was encrypted in Elven language, and even 99% of the elves wouldn't be able to understand it. He was waiting for an opportunity. As he paced back and forth, he moved the magic book closer to Khadgar's left arm. Then a miracle happened. A mysterious shadow in a black robe appeared in front of everyone in the meeting hall. He waved in Khadgar's direction, guiding him over. Khadgar's response was his left arm that was glowing. The old court mage muttered to himself, "Yes, that's right. This is it. The mark of the Tirisful Council. Only people who work for the council have a magic mark." It attracted the council's backup. Oh, damn, could this be Aladi's aura? Aladi? Lang and Andoin's curiosity was about to explode. Chapter 95. With the old mage's explanation, Lang and the others finally understood who Aladi was. Aladi was the first guardian of the Tirisful Parliament, but the history of the Parliament was even older than him, because the original operation of the Parliament was not to train guardians, but to fight against demons who were attracted by human beings' abuse of arcane magic in a team way. After the humans learned magic from the High Elves, they did not know how to control themselves. Moreover, the newly established city of Dalaran was the most serious. Their endless casting of magic once again attracted the invasion of the demons. Completely unable to withstand the demons, the humans could only seek help from the High Elven Kingdom, quell the loss. When the High Elves saw that the actions of the humans could once again cause the world to be invaded, they immediately formulated a plan with the higher-ups of Dalaran, the Magacora's council at that time. Many powerful mages formed a secret organization to protect Azeroth and limit the abuse of magic. This was the origin of the Tirisful Council. As one of the earliest and most powerful guardians, Aladi had unfathomable magic power. If it was a message left by him, it would not be surprising at all. As for Khadgar, even though he was already a dead man, the glowing mark of the Tirisful Council on the inside of his left forearm still made Lang feel a little uncomfortable. That's right. Even though the former Medivh was also a guardian chosen by the Tirisful Council, how could a transcendent world guardian be compared to Khadgar, who was obviously sent to spy on Medivh? Even if it was proven that Khadgar's surveillance of Medivh was correct, it did not mean that Lang would accept Khadgar. Fortunately, Khadgar was dead. His death was not worthless. With the old mage's magic, Lang finally saw something that made him determined for the first time. A magic book of this level was a precious magic tool in itself. After the old mage injected arcane energy into it, a holographic projection appeared in mid-air. At first, what everyone saw were 2 huge planets connected by long black lines. No one reacted. Then, under the old mage's control, one of the ends kept zooming in, and zooming in. From outside the atmosphere, to the huge bird's eye view, to the trees, Lothar was the first to react. This area is the Swamp of Sorrow? What entered his vision was a low-lying swamp that was slowly turning into a desert. The water level was dropping at a visible rate. Countless colorful insects crawled out from every corner of the swamp and fled in all directions. The earth was changing color. It changed from the ugly black and green of the swamp to a lifeless crimson red. Even with his eyes, he could clearly feel that something was seriously deviating. Something was leaving this land with fear. Something else was descending. It was a power that made people feel uncomfortable just by looking at it, making it hard to breathe and stifling their moods. Just by looking at the aura of power, he felt as if the oxygen in his lungs was being squeezed out, and his body couldn't help but tremble. It was the power of evil. That was the power of a demon. This evil was corrupting and affecting the entire land. It was controlling everything and destroying everything. Even the uninhabited black swamp could not withstand this power, and it began to turn into a crimson, filthy desert. What's that over there? Bolvar suddenly pointed at a huge man-made object on the crimson land. The old mage used his magic as instructed, allowing the power of the spellbook to pass over there. The scene before them caused everyone in the meeting hall to lose their ability to speak. A huge door that was at least a dozen stories tall stood alone on the barren red land, and the door frame emitted an ominous dark green evil light. Groups after groups of orcs came out of the door in a mess, but they were scolded by the stronger orc leaders and chased into the nearby empty space. The material used to build the door could not be seen by sight, but it was clear that the design of the door was very much in the style of an ancient temple. At the top of the huge door frame was an extremely ferocious relief of a giant snake with its mouth wide open. On both sides of the door frame were relief sculptures of two hooded human mages wielding swords. As if it was specially displayed, Lang and the rest could see the face on the relief sculpture through the shadow of the hood that should have been shrouded in black fog. The two relief sculptures on the left and right had the same face. It was the face of the former guardian of Azeroth, Medivh. In the next moment, the stone relief sculpture of Medivh seemed to come to life. No, it was completely the will of Medivh descending. The projection of Medivh's head, which was as large as a carriage, appeared in the air of the meeting hall through Aladi's spellbook. Medivh's, no, Sardra's voice sounded in the meeting hall. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't expect you to investigate to this extent. It was still the smiling Medivh, the same radiant expression. The only difference was that his eyes were filled with evil black flames. Those were the eyes of the demon king Sargeras. For those who were weak, just looking at that gaze was enough to freeze their blood vessels. As Lang's personal guards, these guards should not lack courage, but Lang was horrified to find that more than half of the guards in the meeting hall had been frightened to the point of paralysis. The rest of them were also rather weak. There were only a handful of people in the hall who could withstand the aura of fear of the demon net. Medivh. No demon, who are you? What do you want? Although King Lang's voice was a little shaky, he pulled out his sword after all, and stood in front of the projection of the demon king with Anduin and Bolvar. Nothing, I've done what I wanted to do. Since the dark portal has been opened, I'll quietly enjoy the ugliness of you humans, elves, and dwarves being slowly destroyed by the orcs and Karazhan. Watching you walk step by step towards destruction and despair and fear. My mood is incomparably good. There is nothing more ironic than taking the superpower of your guardian and destroying you instead. Ha 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 ha. Medivh, who was under the control of Sargeras, let out a frightening laugh. Seeing their old friend under the control of the demon showing such madness, Lang and Anduin felt like vomiting. The projection of Medivh's head turned into a projection of his upper body. He opened his arms, and his voice was like the roar of a tsunami, echoing throughout the entire meeting hall, and even the entire storm fortress. The destruction can no longer be stopped. You ants cry and howl, cry and beg, kneel at my feet and beg for my mercy, then you will still have to die. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, a young voice was heard. Nonsense, as long as I get rid of you, I can close the dark portal. Chapter 96. Sargeras was delighted. His plan was about to succeed. No, to him, it was already a success. As far as he knew, there was nothing that could stop the power of the demons from invading the world of Azeroth. The strongest guardian, astral mage Mediv, was his possession. The Tirisful council that was in the way was almost wiped out. The previous guardian, Aegwin, who thought she had defeated him, but was actually used by him, had already shed tears of failure in front of him. Dragons? He already had a complete plan to deal with those big lizards. Night elves. Those conservative, stone-like fellows would never move there, but when their territory was not invaded. Compared to direct invasion, using orcs, who were warlike creatures influenced by the power of the demons, was more like cutting flesh with a blunt knife. Sargeras licked his lips, as if he had tasted the sweet taste of revenge, blood, and pain that he had been longing for. When he saw the demonized green-skinned orcs kill every single human, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, armed or not, whether they were roaring angrily or crying, Sargeras was delighted. That fiery excitement flowed into his soul that had been helpless because of failure for a long time. That carefree feeling was enough to make every part of his evil soul sing with excitement. He believed that this plan that he had spent hundreds of years on was the most perfect. Because of this, he could calmly stay in the impregnable Karazhan and watch these ants die. But now there was actually a tiny ant saying, "As long as I get rid of you, I can close the dark portal." Sargeras didn't react for a moment. In the next moment he suddenly came to a realization. This tiny little fellow that had once slightly aroused his interest was shockingly right. That's right. The interworld teleportation of the dark portal was not particularly stable now. In fact, the entire dark portal was like a phone. One called, and the other answered. As the caller, if something happened to Mediv, then the spatial coordinates would immediately be messed up. Sargeras' plan to let the orcs continuously attack the world of Azeroth would naturally be ruined. Of course, the premise was that he would really be killed by these ants. After coming to his senses, Mediv, who was controlled by Sargeras, immediately revealed an intriguing smile and let out arrogant laughter. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Wah ha 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 ha. What a joke. I'm dying of laughter. I've lived for countless years, and it's the first time I've seen someone as ridiculous as you, who doesn't know your limits, and yet can point out the crux of the matter. The muscles on Medivh's face twisted hideously, and his pair of red eyes clearly revealed evil. Yes, that's right. My dear little fellow, as long as you get rid of the Mediv that I control, the door of darkness will indeed close as you said. But do you ants have the courage and ability to do that? Hee. Let me tell you, death is not the end. If you are really stupid enough to come to Karazhan, then be prepared to have your soul tortured by me forever. As the last word fell, Medivh's projection disappeared. What followed was the screams of the court mage. Atoms. Lang's eyes, which were always full of wisdom and courage, reflected the tragedy in front of him. On the old mage's robe, the protective spell that was supposed to be very powerful was automatically activated, and in the next moment, it exploded. The well-dressed old mage immediately became like a beggar. This was just the beginning. Under the watchful eyes of everyone present, the old mage's two arms suddenly twisted in circles like a fried dough twist. Everyone in the meeting hall could clearly hear the old mage's blood-curdling screams, and the sound of his muscles being torn, and his bones being crushed. As if being kneaded by countless invisible hands, the old mage's limbs were all kneaded into his body, and his entire body began to turn into a meatball. But the old mage still didn't lose his life. His internal organs seemed to be protected by a special evil magic. Not only the old mage, but in the next second, half of the two squads of royal guards in the meeting hall suffered the same fate. They were like iron objects attracted by a magnet, and they were sucked into the old mage's body by that inexplicable evil force. More than 10 people were all squeezed together and became an even larger meatball. Everyone seemed to be clear-headed, and they were mumbling all kinds of things. Mom, save me. No, Sir Lothar, give me a quick death. Kill me now. This horrifying scene would make any normal person tremble in fear. Even the temperature of the air seemed to plummet. In the next moment, the bodies of these victims spontaneously combusted. The evil blue flames roasted their bodies and tortured their souls. Every survivor's clothes were soaked in cold sweat, because they could clearly see their comrades, their companions, the familiar faces and souls that had accompanied them for countless years, leaving their bodies and being burned by the demon's flames in midair. Sargeras had already left in laughter. Seconds and minutes ticked by. In the huge meeting hall, there was only the unpleasant smell of burnt corpses, the seemingly echoing screams, the dead air, and the extremely heavy breathing of the survivors. This was the demonstration of the Demon King Sargeras. He used his supreme evil magic to show Lang and the others how powerful and terrifying he was. He was telling Lang to obediently die in despair and pain. This was the only ending he had arranged for Stormwind, the entire human world, and the entire world of Azeroth. Lang's body was trembling uncontrollably, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. Lang didn't even know when the crown had fallen to the ground. He sat on the throne, exhausted, and couldn't even move a finger. Lothar quickly came back to his senses, and he was shocked to find that someone was faster than him. Duque. Duque's face was also ashen, but the sharp light in his eyes told Lothar that he had made up his mind. Lothar and Duque's eyes met in midair. Great minds always think alike. If they didn't explode in silence, they would die in silence. They weren't people who would wait for death, so there was only one choice left. Both of them nodded at the same time, and said in unison, "Your Majesty, please allow us to lead an army to attack Karazhan." It was I who made the decision to influence the will of the Mediv, making him approve of you, and accept you as his disciple. Khadgar's face instantly paled. Why did I accept you? Do you think it's loneliness? Wrong. That was because he was bored. I didn't have much to do while I was eroding Mediva's soul, so I was just looking for something to do. Originally in my script, when the time was right, I would let you go back to Stormwind City. Then, I would persuade Lothar or Urian to personally lead the troops here. In this Karazhan, the three of us, who have known each other for many years, would have the most tragic and cruel battle. Do you know why I changed my mind? Sargeras lightly roasted Khadgar with a wisp of soul flame. Khadgar, who was in the form of a human soul, had a pained and confused expression on his face. You're too boring. You didn't surprise me at all. That little guy named Duque is different. Not only is he talented, but he's also full of possibilities. He surprised me, and I'm very happy. So, I chose him to assist Lothar or Urian as my challenger, not you. Ha 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 ha. Ignoring Karthika's stupefied and dejected expression, Sargeras lightly tossed the crystal that imprisoned Karthika's soul to some unknown corner. Lightly tapping his forehead, Sargeras controlled Mediv to observe the changes within Karazhan with Mage's Eye. Karazhan, which had once exuded an aura of mystery and scrolls, was now becoming evil. The servants who had once served Mediv, as well as many people who had tried to find out what had happened to Karazhan. They had Lothar's elite spies, mercenaries, and even nobles. They gathered in the lower hall of Karazhan's Mage Tower, in a daze. Under the effects of the evil demonic power, their bodies were undergoing some strange changes. In Stormwind Stronghold, on a balcony facing the barracks, King Lang's face was full of hesitation and pain. Anyone who saw Lang's handsome face would feel that Lang was about to cry. His golden hair had lost its radiance of confidence. Instead, it was replaced by a gloomy, almost remorseful voice. The queen walked over lightly and held onto Lang's arm. My dear, didn't you tell me before? Instead of doing nothing and regretting it, why not regret it after you've done it? Lang's voice was choked with sobs. But that could very well be the legendary Demon King Sargeras. Is Sargeras invincible? Has Sargeras never failed? The queen seemed to be implying something. He suddenly thought of the legendary war from 10,000 years ago. Although 10,000 years was definitely too long for humans with short lifespans, there were still many living fossils called elves who had lived for 10,000 years. Many night elves and high elves were now witnesses of that time. Lang suddenly felt much better. Indeed, Sargeras has been defeated before. The queen was resolute. Since he can be defeated once, he can be defeated a second time. But Anduin, Lang wanted to continue, but he met the queen's bright and hopeful eyes. It was as if she was reminding him to recall the scenes that had happened before. Yes, that's right. Just after Sargeraz's will retreated, Andoin and Duque joined forces to remonstrate. Your Majesty, we have no way out. Do we not resist and be slowly tortured to death, or fight to the death? Choose. Your Majesty. Duque was almost roaring. But if the resistance fails, the people of Stormwind. Bolvar came to his senses as well. He took a step forward and knelt on one knee. His firm voice shook one's soul. Your Majesty, even if the resistance still brings destruction, then, before we step into the gates of hell, we can at least tell the people without regret that we tried our best. Instead of hiding under the bed and shivering like a coward, becoming the joke of the demons. Sunlight could hardly penetrate the treetops and reach the ground, so most of the time, visibility in the forest was extremely poor. Even pedestrians walking in the forest had to carry a torch. Under such circumstances, galloping on a horse would be courting death. The group of people only let the horses trot at a small pace. Lothar, who was leading the group, raised his right fist, and the cavalry immediately pulled on the reins to raise their horses' heads. As the horses did not gallop fast, they completed the entire deceleration process in 2 to 3 steps. Take a break, Lothar instructed. He jumped off his warhorse agilely, handed the horse over to his attendant, and walked to the back of the group. Almost at the back of the group, he saw Duque, who looked like he was having a toothache. Hey, my little hero, looking at you now. It's hard for me to associate you with the young hero, who was so generous in the meeting hall, and didn't even bat an eyelid in the face of death. Duque grimaced in pain. What could he do? How could a transmigrator, a university student who grew up in the city, have the opportunity to ride a horse? Even after he transmigrated, he had found time to learn it. However, short-term training was completely different from riding a horse for a long distance. Horses were living creatures. Even if they had muscles on their backs to slow down the impact, they still could not compare to a small car with shock absorbers on a flat road. The jolts and the continuous galloping made Duque feel as if his internal organs had shifted. It was not an exaggeration. On the first day, Duque almost vomited last night's dinner. In just 2 days, they crossed nearly 300 kilometers of forest trails in the entire Elven Forest and entered the Twilight Forest. One had to know that this was not a modern highway before he transmigrated. Many of the trails were not even muddy roads. They were narrow paths that only hunters would take. At least 5 horses broke their legs because of the journey and had no choice but to give up. 2 cavalrymen almost broke their necks. The only good thing was that after entering the Twilight Forest, the speed of the horse slowed down, and Duque could catch his breath. Faced with Lothar's question, Duque panted heavily and glared at Lothar. Bastard, laugh if you want. Don't give me a chance to laugh back. Lothar laughed and helped Duke off his horse, almost lifting him with his hands. Lothar's elite soldiers were busy in an orderly manner, either arranging sentries, feeding the horses, or standing in a circle vigilantly. They took out their canteens and sipped from them. Of course, many people looked at them with strange eyes, because this combination was too strange. A knight, a mage, and a female orc. No matter how many times he looked at this combination, it was strange. Human, you are too weak. In the tribe, a weak existence like you is not even fit to be a laborer, Garona said mercilessly. This strange orc woman was straightforward. If it came from someone else's mouth, it would be sarcastic. But she only felt that it was natural. Duque could not help but sigh at the magic of fate. Sure enough, after some communication, Lang and Lothar, just like in history, readily chose to accept Garona. After asking a lot about the orc tribe, they agreed to let this powerful female orc, who was familiar with the terrain of Karazhan, join the assault team. Duque rolled his eyes at Garona. Come on, most of us human mages are like this. Actually, Duque wanted to say that the pharaoh here were all pampered. Unfortunately, Garona gave Duque a knowing blow. She showed a puzzled expression. But us orcs, whether warlocks or shamans, are much stronger than you. Duque sighed. Sure enough, the styles were different. There was no way for their brain waves to intersect. But after this, if he didn't have to become a ghoul, he really had to consider training his body. Azeroth. All the famous women were definitely better at fighting than the other. If he was too weak, he really couldn't pick up girls. Lothar suddenly asked in a low voice, "What do you think our chances of beating Sargeras are?" Duque raised 2 fingers, not the V that represented victory but 20%. And this is based on the premise that the soul of your old friend Medivh has not been completely annihilated. Chapter 99. Duque wasn't the type of person who was extremely adventurous. Duque wouldn't gamble with his life, or anything like that. But gambling with his life became gambling with his moral integrity. That had a different meaning. In fact, when Sargeras descended upon the meeting hall of the Storm Stronghold, a few lines of words appeared in Duque's system notification. Important human nature, moral integrity choice. In the eyes of the Demon King Sargeras, you're just a slightly interesting ant. But you, who are familiar with history, realize that this may be a chance to change your fate. If you're really lucky, and can force Sargeras into a corner, and save the Demon King when he's about to lose, the system has determined that you have an 87% chance of transforming yourself into a powerful demon when you're conscious, and become one of the commanders of the Burning Legion. Of course, if you can help Anduin Lothar successfully kill Medivh, and make Sargeras scram back to the abyss, then you'll undoubtedly become the hero of the entire world of Azeroth. According to the calculations of this system elf, you have a 999% chance of restoring all the missing moral integrity and soul power. You'll completely get rid of all possible negative soul states. The system didn't say what the outcome would be if he failed to challenge Medivh, but Duque could guess it. Dying under the fangs of a wild boar, and dying in front of the Demon King, were 2 completely different concepts. Just like in the future, the knights who died in the Scourge army would often be transformed into Death Knights. Falling into the hands of Sargeras, his soul was really, Duque had always thought of himself as immortal. He didn't have the Virgin Mary spirit to save the world, nor did he have the violent tendencies to do evil and destroy the world. Since he had transmigrated, he began to adapt to this world. The Martians and the Death Seekers fought, and many people died on both sides, and your friends and family fought with the violent and evil orcs, and many of your friends and family died. These were 2 completely different concepts. Not to mention a human, even he would feel heartache when a cat or dog that he had raised for a long time died. That was why, even though the history of Azeroth had been changed beyond imagination, especially when Khadgar, who was supposed to be the winner, had died, Duque could not bear to see Lothar go to Karazhan alone to die. No, it should be said that from the moment Sargeras arrived arrogantly in the meeting hall, Duque felt as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning, and he didn't like Sargeras at all. No matter what, Duque was already deeply involved with Stormwind, and even the entire world of Azeroth. Moreover, Duque was definitely unwilling to see the Burning Legion do whatever they wanted. Duque thought to himself, Khadgar, I'll make up for your share. Lothar didn't know what Duque was thinking. On the contrary, when Lothar heard Duque say that the success rate was no more than 20%, his face lit up. That's Sargeras we're talking about. As long as the success rate isn't 0, I'm already very happy. He slapped Duque's shoulder with his powerful palm. Not bad, young man. You actually thought the same as me. I'm starting to think that bringing you along was a wise decision. At least you're much more reliable than those court mages. When I see them, I always feel that these inflexible and dogmatic fellows will just stand there and compete with Medivh in terms of magic, and then be tortured to death one by one. Duque smiled, but didn't say anything. He knew that Lothar's words were a joke. Of course, the most important thing was that on the battlefield, Stormwind was at a complete disadvantage in terms of magic. The orc warlocks were much more terrifying than Duque had imagined. There were many things that Duque couldn't reveal too much about. This caused the Storm Royal family's mages to be at a great disadvantage when fighting against these warlocks that they had never seen before. In a sense, warlocks who had more strange methods and could wear down their energy consumption were the nemesis of mages. The appearance of Cerberus, who specialized in countering mages, made the pharaoh's scalp go numb. Due to the death of one of Stormwind's 2 Morning Star mages, the strongest court mage by Lang's side, Stormwind was short on manpower. However, mages were necessary. Without them, if the enemy warlocks attacked, even if they only used fear to kill an officer in the human army, the entire battlefront would collapse. This was a vicious cycle. In any direct confrontation, without mages, military formations would easily collapse. With mages, when mages lost in a battle of magic, they would either die or flee. When the orc warlocks had free hands, they would still be defeated. In the entire elven forest, there were battles of resistance and pursuit. It could be said that the humans were being pushed back step by step. The entire Stormwind Kingdom was permeated with an atmosphere of sadness and despair. However, it was under such circumstances that Noxus led his elites to attack. It was not that Duque had not asked these soldiers how they felt when faced with such a death mission. However, there was only one answer. For Azeroth, Duque saw smiles, and saw hearts that were willing to die for their country and their people. Their voices echoed in Duque's chest, and even in the skies of the human kingdom. It was like a lingering echo, echoing in Duque's ears over and over again. It was not an oath, but it was more touching and firmer than any oath in this world. Duque felt his blood being ignited by some kind of passionate flame, and it was incomparably hot. Faced with Noxus's theory of winning, Duque suddenly clapped his hands and said loudly, "Those who don't have missions, please come over here. I have something to announce." Noxus was a little curious, but he did not stop Duque, and nodded slightly. Immediately, a few adjutants waved their hands, and the elite knights quickly surrounded them. Duque stood on a big rock, so that most people could see him. What you're going to face is also a group of opponents that exceed your imagination, demons. So, the first thing I hope you do is forget the military rules that Noxus taught you, and learn what it means to be flexible. Duque's words caused a silent uproar, and almost all the soldiers looked at Noxus. Noxus smiled instead of being angry. "Go on, the soldiers I chose are the most intelligent, apart from loyalty and skill. As long as it helps us win, I don't mind you challenging the military rules I set this time." Duque nodded and continued. "The enemies you're going to face are all far stronger than you are, and they control mysterious powers that you can't imagine. What strict military formations are synonymous with sending food to your death. Forget about your formations and military manuals. Avoid all the dazzling energy bodies, and look for opportunities to stab your sword into the opponent's back, or anything that looks like the opponent's core." Chapter 100. After walking out of the Twilight Forest, the sky was once again reflected in their field of vision. After going through the torment of darkness in the Twilight Forest, he felt much better on the rugged headwind path. After walking for 2 days in a row, they finally couldn't find a suitable campsite on the 3rd day, because it was too close to Karazhan. As night fell, the assault team simply spent the night on the path by the cliff. On one side was a steep mountain wall, and on the other was a bottomless cliff. Lothar had no choice but to let the team of more than 200 people form a long snake. "If Sargeras gets a group of his men to attack us here, we'll be finished," Anduin said to Duque. Duque smiled. "Would you run tens of kilometers just to hit a mosquito? If he really underestimates us to that extent, that would be great," Anduin said. "He will, because even though Sargeras has fallen, he's still a creation titan. To him, it's already a grievance to be able to hide in Mediva's body. He won't have the leisure to deal with us." Titans, a race of creation with divine power. About 150,000 years ago, the Titans formed the Pantheon and began their journey of creation. Sargeras was the Titan warrior who was responsible for defeating many evil creatures, during the journey of creation. The Pantheon visited planet Azeroth, and after setting up mini laboratories and creating their own servants, they set the order for the entire system to develop on its own before leaving. Later, a group of extremely powerful special parasitic creatures invaded the Titans' laboratory in Azeroth. They ruled the chaotic elements there and became the leader of the planet, the Ancient Gods. The army of the Ancient Gods grew stronger and stronger. While they ruled over Azeroth, they also infected many of the Titans' creations and servants, turning them from inorganic creatures to organic creatures. This was known as the Curse of Flesh and Blood. About 25,000 years ago, Sargeras betrayed the Pantheon Council, created the Burning Legion, and began his burning expedition with the purpose of destroying the experimental results of the other Titans. It was precisely because Sargeras was a Titan that he was destined to be proud and arrogant. Duque said slowly, "Arrogance is born from the heart. When victory has become a habit, when you are so powerful that you can crush all the weak creatures, your arrogant heart can no longer tolerate any other opinions." For Sargeras, stealing Mediva's body, killing the guy from the Tirisful Council, and defeating Aegwynn was already the limit of his condescension. So before we enter Karazhan, we don't need to worry too much. Lothar nodded. "I hope so." That was how Duque comforted Lothar. However, he was still a little uneasy. He kept praying in his heart, hoping that the history of Mediv being defeated would repeat itself. After all, he and the Stormwind Kingdom, and even the entire world of Azeroth, were inextricably linked. He looked up at the starry sky and saw a strange red light coming from the direction of the Swamp of Sorrows. Even at night, this evil red light still radiated a light that was thousands of times brighter than the moonlight. The red light and the darkness of midnight intertwined, as if a war of erosion and plunder was taking place. The stars above the elven forest were dim, as if they had been forced into a dead end by a huge dark red shadow. The Star of Storm standing in the northwest seemed to be falling at any time, and all the hopes of the entire kingdom were on Lothar, Garona and him, Duque, these three tiny meteors. Would they be meteors that flashed by? Or would they soar into the sky and shine brilliantly across the entire starry sky? Duque didn't know either. In a trance, Duque fell asleep. When he woke up again, it was already morning. Yes, the plan of attack that he had set with Lothar was to attack at dawn. When the group of people reached the outside of Karazhan, they were surprised to find that the light of the rising sun was rising from behind Karazhan. Like the flames of dawn, it was dispelling the haze entrenched in Karazhan. Lothar turned to Duque and Garona with a confident smile. "Is this a sign that we are about to dispel the darkness and bring light? It's a good sign, isn't it?" Garona rolled her eyes at Lothar. "I never believe in luck, I only believe in my own strength. The strong will win." Both Anduin and Duque ignored the straightforward female beast man. Instead, Duque subconsciously asked, "Are we going through the front door or the back door?" Anduin was puzzled. "Back door? Are you talking about the platform provided for visitors to land on with griffins? Please, even though Mediv knows that we are likely to come, we can't just swagger over in a flock of griffins, can we? Who knows if we will be used as targets and shot down in midair." "No, not that back door." Duque was a little worried. He didn't know how to explain that he knew about the back door in Karazhan from the game. However, there were more than 200 people on Lothar's side. Although they had agreed to attack, they couldn't possibly charge in slowly from the front door, right? If they did that, even if Sargeras was a hibernating bear, he would be woken up. Duque didn't know how Khadgar, Anduin and Garona had easily reached the highest level of Karazhan in the history and fought with Mediv. Duque only knew that if it was Karazhan in the game, it would be so big that most first-timers would get lost. Remember, that was only the game version of Karazhan. In the real world of Azeroth, which had been magnified countless times in the Elven Forest, only God knew how big Karazhan was. Karazhan looked big enough from the outside, but the problem was that the Mage Tower was something that couldn't be described by science. The space inside the Mage Tower was often larger than it looked, because the Mage Tower would integrate all kinds of space magic. Besides, The owner of Karazhan was the astral mage Medivh. Now that Medivh was Medivh controlled by Sargeras, it was far from the Karazhan that was full of ghosts in Duque's memory. In the game, the experience gained from defeating the boss was likely to be useless. It was best to avoid fighting with the small boss and defeat Medivh directly. Follow me. Duque knew that it was useless to explain, so he simply led the way. A mage had many servants and followers, so there were many houses outside Karazhan. But now these houses were all empty. Duque led Lothar and the assault team, and directly ignored the main gate of Karazhan. They crossed the river on the right side of the main gate that was not rushing. Then, they pushed open the unlatched door and entered a 3-story house. Duque turned left with familiarity and saw a staircase. He walked up the stairs, and after a while, Lothar found a bridge that was very high above the ground. On the other side of the bridge was a secondary tower of Karazhan. However, in front of the secondary tower, there was a locked iron door. Damn, how did you know? Lothar looked as if he had seen a ghost. Duque shrugged. Well, here's the problem. I don't know how to pick a lock. I came here purely to try my luck. Now we can return to the main gate. With a click, the sound of a lock being unlocked came from behind Duque. Garona smiled. The lock is open and then? Uff, Duque choked. Chapter 101. How important was the back door in Karazhan? It was hard to answer this question. Duque didn't know what the world of Azeroth, which was 80% similar to the world of Warcraft that he knew, would be like. He only knew that from ancient times until now, anyone who fought their way in through the front door was either extremely powerful or extremely stupid. In this world, the higher the status of the Mage Tower, the higher the Mage Tower. Medivh must be at the top of the tower. Okay, here's the problem. According to the game, Karazhan had 12 bosses of various sizes. Of course, this wasn't the ruins of Karazhan that were filled with ghosts, immortals, and demons after Medivh died in the game. Many of the monsters and bosses that Duque had imagined wouldn't appear. However, looking at the house where the human servants lived in front of the Karazhan Mage Tower, he could see that nothing good would come from the front door. Demonic humans? Or monsters summoned by Sargeras from another world? No matter which it was, he was sure that entering from the front door would lead him directly into Sargeras' playground. This was a battle with a great disparity in strength. Even with 2 hero-level characters, Noxus and Garona, on his side, they still couldn't defeat Medivh, who had the advantage of the Mage Tower. The most important thing was to reduce the number and intensity of the battles, and try to fight Medivh in his strongest state. According to the game, going through the back door meant that at least half of the bosses were avoided or killed. In this case, it was very advantageous. Duque glanced at Garona, who was smug and had a praise me expression, and he suddenly lost his temper. Noxus didn't know if he was being honest or not, but he appropriately expressed his surprise and amazement. Oh my god! How did you do it? Just now, one of my best rogues winked at me and told me that he couldn't handle it. Garona put her hands on her hips. Hehe. When you've been imprisoned countless times and tried to escape from the cage countless times, no lock in the world can stop you, no matter if it's a magic lock or an ordinary lock. Duque rolled his eyes. If you're so awesome, why don't you fly? It turned out that he had reached the master level in Hidden Room Escape. Lothar drew his sword. Okay, next question. Duque, where does this door lead to? Do you have any information or leads? Duque was embarrassed. Do I have to recite the name of the boss in the game for you? Duque could only shrug. I don't know. Even my teacher only told me that there is a back door in Karazhan. At least we can bypass the stable, the servants' rest area, and the reception area for nobles. At this time, Reginald Windsor stepped forward and asked, what's the point of avoiding these areas? Duque rolled his eyes again. Yes, Duke had brought Windsor, just as he had in the history. Even though history had greatly deviated, aside from the fact that Khadgar had been killed, Duque still tried his best to restore the history of the weak defeating the strong. Of course, Windsor had changed from a soldier of Lothar to a follower of Duque. This was also a big change. Duque still believed that just as Lothar should have been blessed by the goddess of fate, Windsor should not have died in this place. Windsor was still relatively young now, so Duque could only patiently explain. Originally in Karazhan, there were hundreds of servants helping to take care of the entire mage tower. But now they are all gone. The most likely reason is that they have all been turned into demons by Sargeras, or demonized creatures. Bypassing these areas is also to reduce unnecessary casualties. Of course, a feint is still necessary. What is a feint? Garona suddenly asked. Duque slapped his forehead. There was a female orc with the wrong brain waves. How troublesome. Windsor explained to Garona. Duque turned to look at Lothar. If we go through the back door, I have a 70% chance of avoiding more than half of the enemies and killing my way to Mediv within an hour. But nothing is absolutely safe. You are the commander, and the decision is in your hands. Okay, the main force will go through the back door, Lothar agreed decisively. Lothar's straightforwardness made Duque, who had prepared a bellyful of excuses, a little stunned. Lothar patted Duque on the shoulder, his hearty and extremely rich face full of magnanimity. Have some confidence in yourself. In the field of mystery, you are the expert. Since you have used your actions to prove your loyalty to the kingdom and to humans, what's wrong with us outsiders putting our lives in your hands? Anyway, I will be satisfied if we can achieve some results against Sargeras. Okay, then I will cross the line. Everyone listen to me. We will set up like this. At the highest level of Karazhan, Mediv was sprawled out on a deck chair. If anyone saw it, they would be surprised to find that there were dozens of light screens floating in the void around Mediv. Each light screen had a different picture, and many of them had nothing to do with the world of Azeroth at first glance. The scenes on these light screens were like movies that had been played in 10 times faster speed, as if the entire river of time had been accelerated. However, no matter which picture it was, there was the same theme: destruction and killing. In different corners of the universe, the Burning Legion was wantonly destroying, endlessly spreading death. Sargeras, who was attached to Mediv, found that his entire spiritual sea was full of the same wailing and begging. Sargeras Mediv frowned. He was a little tired of it. With a light snap of his fingers, the entire spiritual space became quiet. Only the sound of chaos magic surging through the void and transmitted from his body was left. This sound was so strong, like the whistling of a wild wind. Even though his body was sealed and dormant, Sargeras could feel how wonderful his condition was. Sargeras didn't even need to move a finger. His vision crossed the space of Karazhan, and his eyes reflected the entire aperture on planet Azeroth. This aperture emitted a bright and mysterious brilliance, rejecting the direct invasion of all pure-blooded demons. However, everything changed because of the invasion of the orcs. Sargeras could see the orcs, who had drunk the demon's blood, crossing the void and entering the world of Azeroth. As the orcs entered, the power of the Circle of Light began to weaken at a rate that was undetectable to the naked eye. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. I need more demonized orcs to pollute this land, Sargeras muttered to himself, as he tried to think of a way to speed up the countdown to the destruction of this world. Suddenly, he sensed an intruder. Chapter 102. Draw your swords. The future Marshal Reginald Windsor's voice was still childish. He did not know why Duque had asked him to lead this elite troop of 200. He also did not know why this troop, which made up more than 90% of the assault team, was used as a feint. He only knew that Duque, who had become his master, and Anduin Lothar, whom he admired the most, had placed their utmost trust in him. This trust was very heavy. I'll leave my men to you, Lothar said. A soldier who doesn't want to be a marshal is not a good soldier. Reggie, I have high hopes for you, but you also need to prove yourself. This is your chance. Duque patted his shoulder. Windsor was already very grateful to have the honor of fighting for the kingdom in ruins. He was sure that he did not follow the wrong person. Duque, who seemed to be mysterious, was actually a great hero of the kingdom. Now that he heard their trust in him, Windsor's eyes almost teared up. The appointed time had arrived. In the first rays of the morning sun, the longsword was raised high, bringing with it the brilliance of the sun, like an arc of flames. Enchanted weapon, Demon Slayer. This mid-tier enchantment could permanently enchant a close-range weapon, giving it a chance to stun a demon and deal extra damage. To be honest, this was not a weapon that a soldier could have. Even the chief swordsmen of the noble families might not have one. However, the rich and capricious Duque found an enchantment master and enchanted all the swords used by the 200 warriors with Demon Slayer. Windsor didn't know how powerful the enchantment was, but he could sense a holy aura from it, which delighted every warrior. Windsor's figure stood proudly in the morning light. The elite warriors of Stormwind all looked at him and raised their long swords at the same time. Light filled the air, and the cold glint of the blades was faintly discernible. It was like the first light of dawn spreading across the dark land, driving away the darkness. Charge! Bearing in mind Duque's repeated warnings, Windsor didn't advance in a strict military formation, instead using an even more disorganized charge. The battlefront began to push forward. Unknowingly, the pace of every soldier was quietly increasing, and their strides became larger. After a short 10 meters, almost every soldier was fighting to be the first to run. For Azeroth! For His Majesty Rin! For my lover! The soldiers shouted messy slogans, but they quietly changed their formation in the midst of their charge. 8 warriors holding siege hammers used to break down doors had already reached the front line at some point. Quang Dang! The Iron Gate, which was as tall as 3 people, broke into pieces. Karazhan was not a fortress, and there was no moat. Even the iron gate and wooden door at the gate were more for decoration. The defense of a mage tower never relied on external objects. Perhaps it could be said that they were able to successfully approach the gate of Karazhan, because Sargeras ignored them. Rumble! The door also fell down. The brave warriors with torches in their hands killed their way in. Then, under the illumination of the fire and the torches inside the gate, they saw their enemy, Satyr. A demon with cracked hooves, unkempt goat legs, goat-like horns, razor-sharp claws, and a long lion's tail. The origin of Satyr could be traced back to the ancient war. Among the High Elves, there was a Kaldorii noble named Havis, who was Queen Azhara's most trusted and closest advisor. Havis was one of the main culprits who led the Legion into Azeroth, and as the ancient war progressed, he brought more and more suffering to his race. But he was finally defeated in an encounter with the young druid Malfurion Tempest. Malfurion had completely destroyed his sinful body. However, Sargeras felt that Havis still had value, so he resurrected him and became the first satyr in the world. As long as there was a strong enough demon curse, and the target's will wasn't strong enough, satyrs could easily turn other creatures into satyrs. Although most of the satyrs' bodies had become inflated, and most of them were more than 2 meters tall, Windsor and the others could tell from the clothes that these satyrs had left that they were satyrs who had once served Medivh. Windsor's eyes narrowed slightly, and only one word came out of his mouth. Kill! The assault force of Stormwind was like a flaming rocket, instantly breaking through the group of satyrs. Now that he was within close combat range, Windsor could even see the red flames flickering in the eyes of these purple-furred demons. What kind of chaos and madness was that? The warriors of Stormwind were heroic. As elites personally selected by Lothar, they couldn't help but feel nervous, even when facing such an unknown opponent. But when they saw the young figure at the front of the team, they couldn't help but feel more courageous. At some point Windsor, who was leading the charge, had become their flag. The satyrs screamed. Their sharp and unpleasant roars were enough to make anyone with a weak mind tremble. Windsor's sword was very steady. When he was 2 meters away from the first demon, a visible wave of flames burst out from the blade's edge, forming a blade wind in the air. In the blink of an eye, the entire sword's killing range more than doubled. The golden light of the sword was even more dazzling under the flickering flames. It split the dark void with a halo-like brilliance, sweeping across the first row of satyrs with a whoosh. Strangely, there was a burst of sound in the air. The row of satyrs who were 2 meters tall all became 1 meter tall. That was because their entire upper bodies had been sliced off. The impact of Demon Slayer completely blew away their broken upper bodies. Not every warrior who fought against the demons was as lucky as Windsor, but a sword enchanted by Demon Slayer often emitted a holy aura that was enough to shock the satyrs. The first wave of human soldiers were all unharmed. There's hope. In the face of these human soldiers who were armed to the teeth, these newborn satyrs were as weak as chicks that had just hatched. Even a slightly weaker warrior could kill these farmers and servants who had turned into satyrs in 3 rounds. Kill all the demons. As soon as Windsor finished shouting, he suddenly felt a shiver pass through his body. That feeling gave him goosebumps. Turning his head, he saw a red-skinned evil demon, riding a flaming warhorse, slowly appear at the wide entrance of the passage. The thunderous galloping of the horses, the squeaking of the air, and the scattering satyrs. Everything was telling Windsor that something was wrong. This guy in front of him was not to be trifled with. The guy suddenly said, "Come on, Midnight. Let's destroy this mob together." Chapter 103. If Duke could see this scene, he would definitely be so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. Atumen the Hunter. The boss that should have become an undead in the future had now appeared as a demon. There was no way to find out where Atumen came from. As a beginner boss, he gave Windsor and the others a good show of strength. Atumen rode on an impressive monster. Its body was covered in hellfire, and its 4 hooves were so hot that they glowed red. Just by standing on the ground, the bluestone floor was scorched into small pits. Accompanied by a whooshing sound, the tall hell warhorse appeared in front of Windsor and the others. Even its nose and mouth were spewing flames filled with the smell of sulfur. It was taller than all the warhorses used by the heavy cavalry in Stormwind. It was easy to think that Midnight was a rhinoceros, and not a nightmare beast from hell. When the nightmare beast's roar resounded throughout the first level of Karazhan, when its huge body was covered in flames, no one could stop it. Windsor then realized what Duque meant when he said, "Your responsibility is not light. If you can last for an hour, you will have completed the mission." Noxus had warned these new recruits countless times that on the battlefield, when facing the enemy, the first thing they had to overcome was the fear of death. If they could not face the fear of death directly, then they would only understand that they had been standing at the edge of the gates of hell the whole time. Otherwise, when your head fell to the ground, when you were smashed into meat paste by the huge momentum of the warhorse, when your vision was spinning wildly, when your consciousness quickly dissipated, when the fire of life extinguished, everything would be too late. Your life, your status, your friends, your loved ones, all of them would become history under that one strike. The world after death did exist. Countless undead and demons used their evil figures to prove this terrible, ironclad fact. But once you died, you would no longer be you. In order to avoid this terrible situation, the first thing to do was to overcome your fear. It wasn't an easy task, especially in front of the nightmare warhorse with its own aura of fear. Many elite warriors showed fear on their faces. It was the performance of the nightmare warhorse, or the suppression of the terrifying will. That bone-deep fear completely froze their hearts and blood vessels. They were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, their lives reaped by Atumen the Hunter and Midnight the Nightmare Beast. Strangely, Windsor was not afraid. He felt that something had awakened in his heart. It was something called courage. Heaven looks to the left, warriors look to the right. After witnessing the bravery of the Griffin Legion, Duque had said this more than once. From that day on, Wintersall had always half understood what was said, but at this moment Windsor understood. Everything in his field of vision was still the same color as before. The flames of hell and the cries of the Grim Reaper were still wantonly roaring. His comrade in arms not too long ago had perfectly demonstrated what it meant to leave the world forever. The fear of death spread rapidly, but Windsor didn't feel it at all. His heart was filled with nervousness. This nervousness didn't come from fear, but from a heavy sense of responsibility. It came from Anduin and Duque's trust. The comrades beside him weren't afraid of death. From the moment they'd accepted this mission, they'd already cast aside life and death. But Windsor at least hoped that even if they died, it would be a meaningful death. He wanted them to die on the path to victory. The situation was too chaotic, and command was meaningless. Thus, Windsor decided to do it himself. He saw an opportunity. It was a moment that could not be missed. Just as the nightmare beast Midnight knocked away a warrior not far from Windsor at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye, and just as Atumen the hunter was about to follow up with another slash, Windsor suddenly launched his charge. This wasn't an ordinary charge. This was the charge of a warrior. With a whoosh, Windsor slammed into the side of the nightmare beast, leaving behind a long afterimage. The momentum was so great that even the majestic nightmare beast couldn't help but stagger. Come, four-legged worm. Let's fight to our heart's content. Midnight understood human nature. Windsor's taunt made it very unhappy. But before it could react, a shield engraved with the emblem of the Stormwind Lion gave it a hard blow. Shield slam. The heavy blow made its mouth crooked. Ha! Atumen the huntsman followed up with a cleave, but it was parried by Windsor's enchanted sword, Demon Slayer, which could not have been more accurate. The situation of the battle suddenly changed. It was Windsor's brave battle that caused the unstoppable Atumen to fall into the siege of the elite warriors of Stormwind City. On the other side, at the back door of Karazhan, Noxus, on the other hand, was a little anxious. After Duke ordered Windsor to attack, there was no movement on the other side. What are you waiting for? It wasn't that Lothar hadn't seen the mysteriousness of the pharaoh. For someone like Duque, who refused to enter the back door and hid by the door, looking like he was eavesdropping, Lothar really couldn't figure out if Duque was really performing magic, or if he was simply eavesdropping like a thief. But what was he eavesdropping on? If it was a diversion, why hadn't he acted yet? Lothar's head was full of question marks. Out of trust in Duque, Lothar still didn't say a word. He waited near the back door with his 24 most capable men and the bored Garona. Not to mention, Duque was really carrying out a big project, eavesdropping. Diversion was a good strategy, but it depended on who it was used on. If it was used in a place where communication was inconvenient, and alarm messages could only be transmitted in the most primitive way, diversion would definitely be successful. But this was Mediva's Karazhan. If it wasn't for Sargeras being too arrogant and lazy to even explore the wide area, or deliberately waiting for them to come, they wouldn't even be able to reach the edge of Karazhan. Entering Karazhan was like a mosquito sucking blood from a human body. It might not be felt in the short term, but it would definitely be felt after a long time. Duque was trying to find a way to turn a forceful attack into a surprise attack again. Duque wanted to verify a guess of his. An invisible ripple was spreading in all directions, with the highest point of the Karazhan Wizard Tower as the center. The principle was like radar waves. Through active sonar, a circle of arcane energy rippled out, and when it hit something, there would be a weak ripple back to the highest point of the Wizard Tower. To the people of this world, this kind of principle was simply a fantasy, but for a transmigrator like Duque, it was nothing. Got it? Chapter 104. The unknown demonic energy fluctuated slightly, with different lengths between the peaks and troughs. It was not something that humans could control. Also, it was a language of Eridar, commonly known as the demonic language. This would definitely stump 99% of the mages in the world, but not Duque. That was because Duque had the system elf. This kind of unchanging question and answer every 5 minutes. Even though there were extremely complicated fluctuations, these fluctuations were unchanging. When the system elf repeatedly assured Duque that it could perfectly imitate it, Duque smiled at Lothar. I can use a little trick that only mages know to hide from Mediv for a while. I think before we get close enough to Mediv, no matter how many of his men we kill, he won't notice. Lothar's eyes lit up when he heard this. If he could get close to Mediv, he might have a chance. What was most afraid of? Being drowned by endless demons before they could see Mediv. He and his men were very strong. No matter how strong they were still human. As long as they were human, they would be tired and prone to mistakes. It could be said that the longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. Duque's appearance directly reversed this point. Okay, come with me. Duque waved his hand. No, let's go together. Lothar held a shield in his left hand and a sword in his right. Duque suddenly noticed that Lothar's sword seemed to be fundamentally different from the one he usually held. It's an ancestral thing. But it should be quite useful, Lothar said casually. Duque's mouth opened wide. If he hadn't been barely able to control himself, he would have probably screamed. Who was Lothar's ancestor? The former ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, Thoradin the Great. An ancestral treasure sword? Wasn't that the Emperor's sword? As if he had seen through Duque's surprise, Lothar said indifferently, It's not as mysterious as you think. However, taking this sword out at ordinary times will indeed provoke the nobles of the Stormwind Kingdom. Duque did not dare to ask any more questions. If he did, it would be Lothar's dark history. In fact, Duque couldn't understand why a descendant of Thoradin the Great would become a subordinate of House Wren. Duque brought Lothar and the others into Karazhan. Almost as soon as he stepped through the back door, Duque felt something was wrong. It was a feeling of chaos, as if time and space had been reversed. No matter how one looked at it, this was inevitable. In the primordial era, an unknown explosion occurred in the southern section of the Redridge mountain range, forming a crater, which was the current upwind trail. The space-time in the middle of the crater turned illusory, folded, and became a space-time node in the universe, connecting many other worlds and the distorted void. Countless years later, the astral mage Medivh was attracted by the space-time characteristics here. In order to study this place for a long time, he built a tower in the center of the node and settled down. This was today's Tower of Karazhan. King Lang of Stormwind granted this place to Medivh and gave him the title of Karazhan's master. After integrating the power of Medivh, the guardian of Azeroth, the Tower of Karazhan gradually merged with the space-time node, and the tower itself became a part of this special space-time. This folded and distorted space-time was also the cause of Karazhan's illusions. Karazhan's illusions were not illusions or ghosts, but real fragments of the past and future. They were involved in the chaotic space-time and appeared in places that should not be. So in Karazhan, there would be many unreasonable things. For example, all he could see now were books. There were all kinds of books, not just magic books, but also a large number of humanities, geography, and history books. But these were all visual illusions. Listen, follow me and step on a math book. Math book? Lothar was puzzled. If you don't want to fly to another planet the next moment, follow me. Duque carefully jumped on the books scattered on the ground. If it wasn't for the system elf scan, he would have thought that these were just ordinary books. After the system scan, he was shocked to find that most of the ground here was actually an illusion. If he took one wrong step and was lucky, he might be able to return to Earth. If he was unlucky, that mutilated corpse of an unknown race over there ended up like that. Half of its body was cut off in a circular arc. The group of guys followed Duque, jumping left and right for a few minutes before leaving this area. Although it was a bit funny for a group of big men wearing armor and carrying long swords to jump around, this kind of deadly situation was really not funny. The only good thing was that it seemed that no one who came in was left behind. Then, when Duque led the way through the illusion of a bookshelf, Duque's expression changed slightly. He saw a downward ramp. Below the ramp, there was a faint smell of sulfur. What? Did you think of something? Satyr. And it's the satyr that attracts imps. Duque almost blurted out Tristan Darkhoof's name. As a very powerful earth mage, Duque knew where his limits were. Although his casting ability had surpassed many sky mages, he was still essentially an earth mage. He didn't know what level he was in the original game. He only knew that Karazhan wasn't a good place for newbies to play. In a sense, he didn't know how many levels he had skipped to come to Karazhan. If it was simply a player from before he traveled to this world, he would really be looking for death. However, when the players fought here, it was only the players themselves. Duque came with 3 heroes and more than 200 elite warriors to explore. This feeling made Duque feel very uncomfortable. If the opponent this time wasn't Medivh, it would be a classic example of hugging someone's thigh. And it was Lothar, the perfect thigh. Is there anything to pay attention to? Lothar asked softly. It's best if it doesn't become a protracted battle. Because this summoning type of satyr, given enough time, he can easily create an army. Okay, I'll go first. It wasn't Lothar who spoke but Garona. At that moment, Duque almost had a heart attack. Because he saw Garona, a half-orc with a straight line of thought, rush directly into the secret room, where Darkhoof was at the speed of lightning. Follow her. Not only Duque, but Lothar was also stunned. He knew that most orcs had the word brave engraved on their chests. But he didn't think that even a female half-orc like Garona could be so fierce. He was almost running as he followed Garona into the room that was filled with dim red light. Even the floor was covered with complicated red magic arrays. Chapter 105. The anticipated battle did not start immediately. Garona held a strange bone dagger in her hand. She was clearly hesitating, because in this large room that was more than 100 square meters, she saw a standard blonde human youth. He was a human who looked very similar to the human nobles she saw in the Storm Fortress. This made her extremely confused. Although her instincts told her that something was wrong, her rationality still took over her body. She stopped. The moment Duque saw this, he would rather Garona continue to be reckless. In the world marked by the system elf, this guy's head was clearly marked with a large red skull, and his race was marked as satyr. Kill him. Duque's shout seemed to be a little late. The blonde nobleman suddenly had a mocking expression on his face. He opened his mouth slightly and screamed. A crimson red smoke came out of his mouth, followed by his eyes, nostrils, and ears. In less than 2 seconds, the red smoke that seemed to have a life of its own turned into some kind of corrosive substance, melting the nobleman's facial features like molten wax, and turning into a blurry human figure. Right in front of the 20 ambushers he transformed. An evil rune circle that emitted a foul smell wrapped around him, rejecting all external attacks. Duque and the others could only watch as this guy knelt down powerlessly and curled up on the ground. His skin turned red, and then like a poisonous snake shedding its skin, the thing inside was peeled off from this lifeless, soulless human shell. The red runes that enveloped this guy suddenly exploded and shot in all directions. Duque only had time to cast a shield made of arcane energy before the strange runes reached him. This was not a particularly premeditated attack. The exploding runes were very messy. Unfortunately, there were still a few elite warriors who could not dodge in time, and were affected. Even though their hands and feet were protected by sturdy armor, just a little bit of contact was enough to directly burn through the armor. When the runes touched them, they felt a burning sensation, as if they were splashed with high-temperature molten steel. Naturally, there were also priests who entered with Noxus. Lothar was prepared to launch a surprise attack, so he didn't care if he was discovered. After the warrior hurriedly took off his gauntlets, the middle-aged priest tried to use the power of the holy light to dispel the red runes on the warrior's arm. However, he was shocked to find that his power was powerless. The highly corrosive runes spread out from the wound like a plague. Noxus's pupils constricted. He raised his sword and cut off a large piece of flesh from the victim's arm. The rest of the warriors were similarly dealt with. Everyone's expression changed. This was the most typical demonic power. Ha ha ha. Puny humans. Why did you come here to die? The red light faded, and a satyr with a huge goat head appeared. Accompanied by a burst of arrogant laughter, a typical satyr appeared in front of everyone. Unexpectedly, the other party did not attack immediately. On the other hand, the red-skinned satyr bowed to Lothar in a nondescript aristocratic manner. He placed his left hand on his right chest, and used his right hand to fling away the cap on his head. Then he bowed slightly and nodded. You must be Anduin Lothar, aren't you? I, Tristan Darkhoof, salute you, Tristan said in standard human language. Anduin noticed that this guy actually spoke with a very standard aristocratic accent of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Anduin's pupils couldn't help but constrict. Are you waiting for me? Waiting? No, this is just an accident. It seems that your little mage is quite strong. In fact, I didn't even feel your arrival before your orc scout sneaked into my room. However, since you're here, everyone except Sir Lothar can go to hell. More than one person noticed Tristan's subtle words. Obviously, everyone's life was meaningless to Sargeras except Lothar. I hate you. Garona didn't have the patience to listen to the satyr's nonsense. She immediately attacked. For the first time, Anduin and Duque witnessed Garona's attack with their own eyes. A series of cold lights suddenly burst forth. Garona's attack was so fast that Duque subconsciously thought of the term bullet screen. It was a bullet screen made up of countless hot weapons. The light and shadow left behind by the projectile clearly showed how fast Garona's attack was. Almost everyone on Lothar's side felt like they were in a dream. They all covered their hearts and asked themselves if they could withstand such an attack. Even Lothar, who had tried to fight with Garona before, was also shocked and doubtful. This female orc was too powerful. Garona wasn't short. She was 1.8 meters tall, and even taller than many men. Despite her slender body, she was actually stronger than many human warriors in terms of muscle strength. Such a burly woman actually had agility and speed that exceeded most people's dynamic vision. It really surprised everyone. Such an attack actually couldn't achieve its full effect in one blow. On the floor that was full of runes, there were long traces of sharp weapons crisscrossing, some of which were already more than an inch wide. Those were the traces left by Tristan when he dodged Garona's fierce attack. This demon also had superhuman agility. However, Tristan Darkhoof was not an existence that could be easily beaten. He suddenly let out a low roar, and the room full of bookshelves suddenly felt like it was about to collapse. Many books fell from the bookshelves, and some green-blue imps that were only a little taller than a human's knees suddenly rushed out from behind the bookshelves. Not only the bookshelves, but in the void in the room and even on the roof, more than a dozen blood-red teleportation portals opened. However, the other side of the teleportation portals wasn't a good place with birds and flowers. It should be some kind of terrifying space full of evil. Countless imps rushed out of the teleportation portals, and without saying a word, they directly threw small fireballs at the human warriors in the room. For the sake of flexibility, Lothar's elite soldiers didn't choose the cumbersome tower shield. Most of them used the standard Storm City's zither-shaped shield. Obviously, this kind of shield was not enough to protect them from fireballs coming from all directions. Digga, a 28-year-old veteran soldier, joined the army at the age of 16. He had fought fishmen, killed gnolls, fought beasts, and fought against orcs. As a warrior in the Golden Age, his experience could not be said to be not rich. However, when faced with the unknown mysterious attack, he was momentarily stunned. The fireball came at him at high speed, and the rapidly expanding light in his field of vision made him ready to close his eyes and wait for death. However, it was at this moment that a bright blue light suddenly flashed behind him. Chapter 106. Subconsciously, Digga raised his shield as he tilted his head. Coincidentally, he saw a strange, illusory white palm made of arcane energy appear not too far away from his left shoulder. This mage hand, that was as nimble as a human's hand, seemed to have captured all of Digga's attention, causing him to forget about the danger and everything else in the world. The only thing left in his vision was this hand made of arcane energy. From the palm of the magician's hand, a series of purplish-blue oval-shaped balls of light shot out and dispersed all the incoming flames. Without the support of the mysterious power, the scarlet flames quickly withered in the air, giving off a feeling that the turbid air in the air had been cleared. This was not the end. If these inferior imps shot a rain of fire arrows, then Duke's counterattack would fill up the entire field of vision in the true sense of the word bullet screen. These short imps were clearly not adept at close-range combat. Digga and his comrades were confident that if they could get close to them, they could definitely teach them a lesson with their swords. However, there was no telling how many people would fall on the way to them. Digga had a rough estimate in his mind. To control these monsters that kept pouring into the room, they would need at least 30 people to barely do it. However, under the barrage of bullets from Duque's terrifying arcane missiles, these imps were like chickens and dogs that were directly pushed back. Their necks were shot, and they suffocated to death. Their chests were shot and they died. Their skulls were pierced, and they were blasted to death by the missiles inside their skulls. Hordes of imps were sent flying in all directions like grass being mowed. Duque, who clearly had the upper hand, suddenly yelled, "Everyone, suppress the imps that come out of the portal." It was rare for Duque to buy time for everyone to charge. The warriors waved their swords and approached the scarlet portal, standing by the side of the door, and giving every imp that dared to jump into the room a sharp and accurate blow. Duque's cheeks twitched. For some reason, this reminded him of whack-a-mole. There was another important reason why Duque's arcane missiles could not be sustained. Garona had been hit. Demonic chain in this room full of runes and arrays. It was clear that Siahuf could manipulate space to a certain extent. Just as Garona was having the time of her life, she suddenly realized that she had been teleported. The scene in front of him changed instantly, and he was in the middle of the room. Thick demonic chains emanating strange evil energy shot out from the blood-red magic circle on the ground and bound Garona tightly. Woo! Humph! The muscles on Garona's arms and thighs swelled due to the exertion of strength, and the extremely healthy and beautiful lines of her muscles were clearly visible. However, even though her neck was as thick as 2 detonators, she still could not move the demon chains on her body. The beastmen never lacked power, but unfortunately, the mysterious power was not something that could be shaken by brute force. Lothar seemed to want to save Garona, but Duque stopped him. "I'll do it, you go after Siatue." Lothar didn't know why Duque made such an arrangement, but he still followed it. The gorgeous sword that emitted a faint golden glow drew a bright arc in the air and slashed at Siahuf. As a kind of demon that liked to abuse others, Sartre not only had good spellcasting abilities, but their melee combat abilities were also not to be underestimated. Seeing the aggressive Lothar, Siahuf actually took out a huge scimitar out of nowhere and started fighting with Lothar. Holding the scimitar in his right hand and waving his claws in his left, he attacked quickly and flexibly, pushing Lothar back. Duque did not care about Lothar. If Lothar was killed like this, then he did not deserve to be called the Lion of Azeroth by the future generations. He shifted his firepower and suddenly blasted it at Garona's chains. It was not an easy task. In the real world, there was no such simple and convenient spell that forbade hurting one's allies. A hit was a hit. Even if Garona had a physique that surpassed humans, she was still an orc at the hero level. Duque was very doubtful that his arcane missiles could hit Garona when she was free to move. But when her body was bound, Garona was a live target. Seeing the overwhelming arcane missiles pouring down, Garona's face showed a frightened expression for the first time. Most orcs were simple-minded and ignorant. When faced with the unknown, it was easy for them to feel awe. Before the orc warlocks were born, they transferred their awe of the unknown and mystery to the shamans. Therefore, orc shamans often had a very high status. Similarly, although she was a mixed blood, Garona still inherited the awe of mystery. Seeing so many arcane missiles, Garona almost suspected that Duque was going to kill her. However, that was not the case. Duque was very clear about Garona's position in the long river of Azeroth's fate. Perhaps there would be such a day when Duque would really attack Garona, but definitely not now. Like a rainstorm, the arcane missiles accurately hit the scarlet demonic chains. Originally, Duque was still worried that his spells could not transcend levels and destroy the demonic chains made by the boss Evil Hoof. He did not know if Lothar's mysterious sword restrained Evil Hoof, or if Evil Hoof's spell itself had a flaw or some strange setting. Duque's attack worked. Under the bombardment of arcane missiles that were as dense as a storm, The thick bloody chains let out a series of tinkling noises before they shattered inch by inch in Garona's and Lothar's peripheral vision. Regaining her freedom, Garona let out an angry roar. And at the same time, she did not forget to cast a grateful look at Duque and pounced on him again. As if surprised by the ferocity of Duque's firepower, Tristan Evil Hoof was caught off guard. As if they had practiced countless times, Lothar and Garona's cooperation was extremely tacit. Lothar attacked fiercely from the front, and his swordsmanship was wide open. In the face of every counterattack from Evil Hoof, Lothar's shield could just perfectly deflect most of Evil Hoof's power with a side attack, making Evil Hoof's fierce attacks useless. And taking advantage of Evil Hoof's flaws, he gave a fierce stab. Garona, on the other hand, focused on going around Evil Hoof's back to stab him. The attack of the half-orc female assassin made Evil Hoof's scalp tingle. His solid demonic skin and thick hair could not resist Garona's fierce consecutive slashes at all. In a moment, Evil Hoof's back was already a blur. Evil Hoof tried to retreat to avoid being attacked from the front and back, but Garona's swift kick almost made him stumble and fall to the ground. At this time, a little imp that was obviously bigger than the other little imps jumped out. Duque narrowed his eyes and focused on this big imp. Kirik, Evil Hoof's closest combat partner. As a capable helper of Evil Hoof, Kirik was definitely not someone to be trifled with. Unfortunately, he had encountered Duque. He had just been summoned, and before he could figure out what was going on, he was sent flying by a huge and illusory palm. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.